Hello, and welcome to In the Beginning Was the Thought, with your hosts, Derek Dodder and Booker Thomas.
Of course, we all know in the beginning was the Word. Through the Word, everything was created. But I thought to myself, before the Word can be spoken, the thought had to occur, and that thought had to encompass all the different possibilities and effects that word would bring. And I think with the type of channel that we're trying to develop, channel that analyzes philosophy, psychology, different writings in history, we should sit back and think about it as thoroughly as possible before we put into words what our final conclusions are. I think if the rest of the world followed that, we'd probably be in a lot better place. But people tend to lead with words rather than thought nowadays. I don't know if my man agrees with me.
I agree. There's definitely some troubles, and I do want to be a part of a project to kind of address it, specifically through a cultural angle. And something like the way that podcasts are taking hold. Podcasts is something I've done for a long time. When I first started, it wasn't necessarily as big as it is now. It was pretty decent. I mean, you had Joe Rogan around and stuff. I started in 2015 is when I started dabbling around with it. And there's a few things, but it is significantly bigger now than it was then.
My son told me about a guy named PewDiePie.
Right.
And around that time, he was like, Dad, and he had to been all of about 9 years old. He says, Dad, we could make a lot of money off of YouTube. And I just kind of scoffed at him. And it's like, son, no one's making money off of YouTube. No one cares about what's going on YouTube. I remember the VHS and the Betamax era. So it just never dawned upon me the potential that podcasting had, not only for monetary purposes, but just for exchanging ideas and developing and sharing your philosophies with others. Definitely regret that.
That's how I see it mostly used. Most of the stuff that I watch, and it is a part of a taste, but these are big channels. I see a ton of dialogos, like a ton of philosophical conversations. Philosophy, I see a lot of politics as well, which can be healthy to talk about, isn't always, but it can be if it's from the right angle. A lot of literature. There's a lot of, now they call them booktubers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? Can't think of the publisher's name, but you see a lot of their readings on YouTube.
All right. That's actually something I've been thinking about doing in this channel, because this channel will probably have a lot of different types of things happening over time. But was reading like public domain books, making my own audiobooks,
right?
My own catalogs of recordings.
I personally think that would be fucking amazing to do.
Yeah. I love reading out loud anyway.
Yeah.
I like speaking.
Yeah.
I love books. And I was thinking if I'll do it, sort of as a solo art for a while, meaning like me or you or whatever. But eventually I would like to do something where I hire, or I would love to be able to hire actors for the different roles and get through the narrative and stuff. Some of my favorite audiobooks are presented in that way, and it's very fun. Did want to kind of recap, since for anyone who would tune into this, as far as the publishing order on YouTube, they'll see this first. On the podcasting side, through Podbean and what they'll see on Spotify and everything in time to come, they'll see everything in order. So the first episode, we just kind of did introductions.
Right.
We kind of espoused a little bit of our philosophies, saw where we met, saw where we had different complementary things and things that we were bridging some gaps and stuff. Second episode, we continued the discussion about culture, because that's what the first conversation got into, culture. And then I wanted to just show kind of how Christianity spread using a specific example, talking about the Roman influence on Christians, then coming into the Nordics and how that played out. But a lot of that conversation was lost. I did take notes on it, so once the second episode is over, I'm going to butt in and kind of summarize our discussion.
Over it again. Always fun.
Oh, I will love to return to that subject.
We can just go back over it again. Not in this episode, but the next one we can just go back over culture again. It gives us more time to research it anyway. And there were some interesting points I wanted to hit in that that we didn't get to touch on. And not only the cultural part, but how culture affects economic development and how regions where different cultures develop affect how the cultures develop and their economic development.
Oh, yeah. So, and that's Wages of Destruction deals with
That
economics, right? That's what they mean by wages. It's like a play on words.
Yeah, Wages of Destruction is a book by Adam Tooze that I read. I'd say it about 3 years ago now. It's about World War II and how not just Hitler, but mostly the German military and the government were able to fund their wars and having very little natural resources themselves were able to gather what they needed to put up an effective front against the Allied powers. It's an amazing work. It's very detailed. It's what a friend of mine calls getting into the weeds. If you're interested in learning about how Daimler Chrysler or Ferrari or Benz or BMW or even Ford himself influenced Hitler's abilities in World War II, I would say pick up this book.
Once I finish it, that'll probably be one we'll have to cover.
Oh, yeah, it's an amazing book.
But at the end, one of the unrecorded pieces of the second episode was we agreed to kind of get into the structure of what the podcast would be, going over literature of different kinds, fiction, philosophy, and we chose The Picture of Dorian Gray.
This is our first, our introduction into that. We both picked up the book, both read the book. This will be my second time. I've read it before.
For me, it was the first, totally fresh. Aside from like cultural references to it from like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen or things like that, I came completely fresh.
Yeah, and I know you like the narrative parts of the story, and I know you like I love more the mundane facts of history. Derek, if I have it right, you love the story, the structure, the meaning behind the story.
Yeah, I'm all in on the Jungian. So I'm kind of like coming from the string of thought from like Jung, Neumann, and Joseph Campbell. I'm looking at symbols. I'm looking at story structure. I'm an educated and practiced in filmmaking, so I'm all from that. What literature analysis and that.
I do love Jung. I still have books of his that I need to get through, but
same here.
Just the things that I like to read. It's usually economics books. Like I'm probably the only person who's enjoyed reading The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I love every book I've ever read of Thomas Sowell, whether it be economics, sociology, or history. Walter Williams, Shelby Steele. I liked reading the Communist Manifesto. I loved Road to Serfdom. There's so many out there. Road to Serfdom, by the way, is Hayek for people who don't know, and it is a really good book. A lot of implications for modern day. He was definitely ahead of his time. And reading about philosophers and economists from long ago, Proudhon, the French physiocrats, Galbraith, you can go on and on. There's so many from old times to now, and it all interests me, the way that things move and how something the entire global way can affect something here that would seem completely disjointed from that original thing.
So what I've got here, and it does have a little bit of history. I didn't go super deep into it, but it's there. I've got a bit of an introduction. So a little bit of a structured thing here, a little intro, and then moving through the chapter by chapter. does get a little vague towards the ending chapters, because I crammed in the last few today. So I didn't have much time to write full, like, crazy synopsis on this. So we'll try this out. We'll see how it works. Yeah. We'll adjust as we go, but I'm going to read this intro and then we'll talk about it. And then we'll go into the first chapter after a little discussion, if that's cool.
Copy that.
All right. You got your copy.
Now you got to give our security lingo. That's our trade.
Were we doing that? Yeah. Marine Corps right into security, but they've been doing it for over 10 years.
All right.
It's hard. I don't even know. Okay. Here we go. The Picture of Dorian Gray was first published in 1980, heavily edited and subjected to censorship in the Limpincott's Monthly Magazine. It was a bit of a scandal after its publications for its criticisms of the upper class and its contents being flooded with homoeroticism. It is a Gothic horror. Yeah, a lot of it. It's drooling with it, but it's good. It is a Gothic horror with the themes of obsession, youth, beauty, aging, love, identity, guilt, and narcissism. In summary, we meet Dorian Gray, a dandy whose beauty disallows him to question his own morals, as everyone automatically trusts him because of his looks. His well is then poisoned by a Lord Henry, to much of the chagrin of Basil, the artist who is obsessed with Dorian and paints his cursed portrait. The entanglement of these three results in manipulations, suicide, murder, revenge, blackmail. Oscar Wilde treats us to a beautiful euphemism and indulgent dialogue by Lord Henry. I think he's got some of the best lines in the whole thing, which is the sweet honey spoken by a silver-tongued demon. Lord Henry plays as Dorian's Dionysus devil, as Basil plays a sort of Dionysian angel. The book was later revised in 1981 and republished in its uncensored version in 2011, which I guess explores more of that eroticism. It should also be mentioned that Wilde had to repress his own sexuality. He could easily be identified with both Basil and Lord Henry. Wilde had to go to trial. In fact, the trial was a defamation case that he brought up, and then it kind of flipped on him, unfortunately. And he was convicted for his homosexuality and spent 2 years in prison. Then later on, he would go off to convert to Catholicism. How genuine that was, I don't know. And shortly after, died. His last words were, "This wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. Either it goes or I do." And then he died, showing that aestheticism that we see in the book. He loved beautiful things in artwork. Yeah. So there was the aesthetic movement in the 19th century, which was sort of individualism that you can see Lord Henry espousing on. It was an art movement that advocated for art's sake. It was similar to how modern artists view their work now, where people try to identify through their work. That was not something that was done in the medieval ages. People did not create artwork to identify with. They usually did it for symbolism, until at least even the Renaissance. They didn't quite have this identifying. The others,
in his own preface,
mm-hmm.
Oscar Wilde wrote, he said, "To reveal art and conceal the artist is the art's aim."
Yeah. And that's an interesting introduction, too, because that carries both contradictions and affirmations of the book's themes, which I find really fascinating what he was doing with that. And this is the other thing. And in modern pop culture, where the consumer finds identity in others' art as well, there's an overwhelming conformity of the youth that find themselves as trying to be different while conforming to one another. So you'll see them being different from the previous generation, but adopting their own cultures and identifying through pop culture.
Our grandfathers are always wrong.
Well, it's an interesting thing. This aestheticism is a very old idea, and here we still live with it, though I think we view it somewhat differently, which would be an important point for people to read this book.
Well, yeah, I'm quoting a part of the book where he mentioned that. He said it in
hit the mic with it so they can hear you clearly.
Yeah. Our grandfathers are always wrong was a quote from the book. I believe he said it in French was the words that he used, but it was in reference to how the way that people before us did it was wrong, but the meaning behind it or the emotion behind it wasn't, you know. Yeah. And that was just based off of what Derek was just speaking about, you know.
It would be interesting to find it. I'm not going to look too long for it, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere. Finishing up this story synopsis or the introduction. In this story, beauty triumphs over morals, and it causes tragedy. Oscar Wilde was a self-proclaimed aesthete. Oscar Wilde had said that Basil Hallward is what I think I am. Lord Henry is what the world thinks of me. Dorian is who I would like to be. Wilde wrote of his inner conflict within this book, which is why I think the introduction carries beautiful contradictions and affirmations for the story. And he also said, Dorian Gray contains much of me within it. Now, next portion I'm going to go into.
If I had to say that Oscar Wilde represented any character, it will be Basil.
Yeah, I can see it all there, and I think I like the way that he put it. Like, let me see what order it was exactly. Basil is what I think I am. This is somebody who, because Oscar Wilde did have an infatuation with a gentleman, Lord, I have it in here somewhere, Lord something. And so there is that identity that he could have there through that experience. Then at the same time, saying, oh, this is what the public thinks of me. There was, I think that is why there is a certain cynicism in the writings of Oscar Wilde that comes through so beautifully in his writing, because he writes these stories that do pose beautiful messaging in sometimes a brutal way. So this is a great example of it. This is a great warning to any young person to basically warn you against a sort of vanity.
I think he understood that, because one of the quotes in the book was, I can always understand brute force, but brute logic I can deal with.
Well, and even though Oscar presents this beautifully moral thing, because it comes in a package that and in this time period was not acceptable, the public's constantly on his ass. In fact, taking to trial, this book was used in his trial against him, and it's like, well, why would you use the beautiful messaging of this book against him? But that's where a lot of his cynicism comes in. And so I think, yeah, it's like, oh, I could see him identifying with Basil. He's trying to be good. The public sees him as a Lord Henry, so there's going to be some slipping into that. Obviously, he knows when he writes these beautiful lines, which we'll get into some of them, of Lord Henry, you can tell that there is some disagreements with it, but then also some originality, the seeds coming from his own mind, philosophies that he's definitely pondered on for some time. I mean, he writes them beautifully, and he writes the contradictions. Sometimes he'll put them right next to each other so that you see the contradictions just as much as he does.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. So you can tell that Oscar Wilde is not just espousing bullshit. He's really trying to give you the real arguments.
No, I agree. And for us to attempt to say that he is this character or that character. Now, Oscar Wilde in this book is every character, just
right.
Like every author in this book, in whatever book they write, is every
That's
character.
Right.
All of these are developed from his mind. All their dialogues, all their emotions, and all of their tendencies are from him. Just a different side of him, a different personality. It's almost what do you call it? It's almost schizophrenic of a fiction novel, because every personality that you write in that book is you seeing from the view of the character that you're writing. So even in like Sybil, he was emoting from that position as if he was her. Even from the old lady, the brother, Basil, Henry, or Dorian Gray himself, the aunt Agatha, they were all Oscar Wilde.
Of course.
dealing with each other the way that Oscar would deal with each one of these different parts of his personality.
And I would take it a step further too. So on the purposeful side, of course, each character will be taken from the self. This is something I understand as a writer as well. But then even on the accidental side, I do believe that because our muse, I believe that the writer's muse is the, this is the next section I'm going to go into. I have a little thing I wrote up for it, but to give a background to use later on in the story, everyone's muse is their anima or their animus.
Yeah.
And this is their dream weaver. And so
I never thought about that. This was a complete display of his anima and animus.
Yes,
Anima being Henry, his animus being Basil.
yeah. In a lot of ways. I broke it down. I wrote, well, we'll get into it, but I kind of break down some of these Jungian subjects so that you can see how do they place on the different characters at different times. And I think that no writer can help but accidentally put these into their story, because when you are coming up with fiction, often ideas just seem to pop into your mind. Well, that's where they're coming from. They're coming from deep within, and they're being given to you by your shadow. They're being given to you by your animus. They're being given to you by your muse. And then it is up to your consciousness all a good writer is. Well, one is the word form. So that's part of it. But the main thing about being a good storyteller is being a good filter of the dreamscape. So dreams often are absurd and make no sense. And some filmmakers and some writers, they dabble in that practice. But if they want their stories to be really captivating, and I think Dorian Gray is one of those stories that is sort of, it's iconic. I mean, it's like Universal Monsters. It captures the public in a way that just lasts forever, like Frankenstein or The Invisible Man. It's one of those things that once you have it, you can't do without it. You know, once you have the Phantom of the Opera, it transcends language, and it just becomes even bigger than pop culture. It's just always there. And that's the mark of a good writer, who can take that dream world. And the reason I think it works that way is because once they have distilled it and filtered it and put it into a narrative sense that just really flows and is well structured. And then on top of that, with the writing of Wilde, somebody like that, where, I mean, this whole thing is poetry. It's gorgeously written.
At best, it is beautiful poetry. At its worst, it is a masterpiece in one-liners and paradoxes.
Yeah. I think that's what calls to the universal experience. And this is a universal experience. There's no way you could read this book and not identify with it from multiple angles. I feel like
every character.
Yeah.
I can see a part of every character, Basil, the dogged desire to be the best at what it is that you're doing. Henry, the effortlessly detached personality who sees everything objectively, the quintessential cynic, or Dorian himself, to be adored. Everyone has lived each of these simultaneous parts of their lives. You know, you've been this celebrated person for whatever reason. You know, you've been a person who based on that celebration wanted to be good at whatever it was you were celebrated as, like Basil, or you wanted to step away from it and call it all meaningless. You wanted to pretend at least you could step away from it and pretend it was all meaningless, like Henry.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there's more characters, but every character you could put yourself in and see through the eyes of. I think Oscar Wilde was brilliant at that, and figuring that he was a homosexual just makes it like no one could write a book with one-liners like this but a homosexual.
So I found the portion about the grandparents, and it appears in chapter 4 in my copy on page 42. I would fail to read French properly. Are you any good at that? Well, it has the translation, "Our grandparents are always wrong," but I wanted to give the audience just the.
Or was it
Well, it looks like it. Les Grand. You want to take a? It's right there at the bottom.
What page is it?
Right here.
What chapter?
chapter 4. On mine, it's page 42. I don't know how it'll come up on yours. So if you pull that up, I'm going to read this little section I wrote up. In fact, I didn't quite write this myself. This is from Young. So this is kind of broken up. This is not my own writing is what I'm trying to say. This is Young, but not pure Young. A little bit of me, a little bit of Young. Me trying to clean it up so it's not all too much. All right. The collective unconscious is part of the psyche, which is distinguished from the personal unconscious by the fact that it does not owe its existence to personal experience. The personal unconscious is what was once conscious, but has been forgotten and repressed, and that is not illuminated or at use in the current conscious thread of thought. The content of the collective unconscious has never been conscious. It is also hereditarily given and not gained through experience. The personal unconscious is home to the complexes, whereas the collective unconscious is the home for the archetypes. Mythological research refers to the archetypes as motifs and categories and of the imagination. That is what we're dealing with here, at least the angle I'll be coming at from this story. So obviously Oscar Wilde is going to put his experiences into the story, which we've discussed, and we discussed that he is accidentally going to pull up the archetypes and put it into his story. So both things happen to all writers no matter what. So here we go. Projection making factor for the unconscious represented by the anima appearing in dreams, visions, and fantasy. She takes the personified form. She is not an invention of the conscious, but a spontaneous product of the unconscious. She is not a substitute figure for the mother. She is the spinning woman, the Maya, who creates illusions by her dancing, somewhat shown by Sybil Vane's hold on Dorian as she acts out a sort of weaver of passions through her art like a dream. So that's one way that we can kind of see it coming up. The integration of the shadow or realization of the personal unconscious marks the first stage in the analytical process, and what without it, a recognition of the anima or animus is impossible. Now, later on, we'll find out that integration begins to happen through Dorian, through, let's say, Henry is sort of the shadow, is the only integration that leads him to Sybil, so that realization happening. Of course, this is happening in a very unhealthy fashion. So both these archetypes, and there is a healthy way to do this, but anyway.
Did Sybil, her character, come across to you as a female equivalent to Dorian himself?
Sort of. And yeah, now that you say that, where in the beginning Dorian was very naive, she is very young and naive. I see her as the most immature version of the anima, the young anima, and her sort of blind love, calling him Prince Charming and all of this. I got more on it I would like to get into when we hop into her character, but yeah, I do see her as a bit of a early Dorian chapter.
To me, like she was Dorian without having the courtesy of a Basil.
Right. Yeah.
Dorian could have been it, but he was already tainted by Lord Henry.
Mm-hmm.
So what would have destroyed Dorian before Lord Henry got there is the same thing that destroyed her, because he was completely innocent.
Yeah. And later on, I want to talk about, too, how Dorian sort of takes on a Lord Henry role for others. He corrupts other people later on through his experience. He becomes a Lord Henry. Although there are marked differences, I think, that are important, that I won't get into too much now, but let's just say Lord Henry is all talk and no action. Dorian becomes action. We never see Lord Henry doing any of the things that he claims are the way. We don't see, he's more of a talker. In fact, it's kind of a criticism, or it's not said as a criticism, but it is a criticism nonetheless, that Basil gives to him. He says that you say a lot of wicked things, but you really don't do anything bad. He's a sort of a man of inaction. That's why he has to live through Dorian. That's why he's sort of a Dionysian character.
Yeah, I looked at him more as a Mephistopheles.
Right. Yeah, you had said that before we started rolling.
He seemed like Mephistopheles to me. Dorian himself was not Faust, but Basil was Faust, and Dorian was the curse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or if you've ever read Faust, he was the woman who ended up being the thing that Faust wanted. the most, and Faust ended up corrupted by Mephistopheles, and everything turned to shit. That's what Dorian seemed like to me.
Yeah.
The manifestation of the curse.
Yeah. And we should see echoes of these characters throughout many, many, many stories. I read a great article that was a comparison of Dorian and Macbeth, and it all echoes very well. And of course, anything Shakespearean would echo. I found out that Oscar Wilde was a huge fan of Shakespeare works, and so he references them a lot.
Yeah, he does. There's a lot of them in this book.
Finishing up this last section, both of these, let me just kind of rewind a little. I'll read the small paragraph again and then get into the last.
What is that quote in your book? Because I'm having trouble finding.
Chapter 4, somewhere in chapter 4.
Because I'm in
42 on mine, so
it should be in the same chapter. I'm going to chapter 4.
Yeah, so let me read here from the top.
It's chapter 2.
So it says, well, I found myself seated in a horrid little private box with a vulgar drop scene staring me in the face. I looked out from behind the curtain and surveyed the house. It was a tawdry affair, all cupids and cornucopias, like a third-rate wedding cake. The gallery and pit were fairly full, but the 2 rows of dingy stalls were quite empty, and there was hardly a person in what I suppose they called the dress circle. Women went about with oranges and ginger beer, and there was a terrible consumption of nuts going on. It must have been just like the palmy days of the British drama. Just like, I should fancy, and very depressing. I began to wonder what on earth I should do. When I caught sight of the playbill, what do you think the play was, Harry? I should think The Idiot Boy or Dumb and Innocent.
Oh.
Our fathers used to like that sort of piece, I believe. The longer I live, Dorian, the more keenly I feel that whatever was good enough for our fathers is not good enough for us. In art, as in politics, a grand-père ont toujours tort. Probably saying that wrong, but that's what it was.
Got it. Yeah.
And that's what you said about the grandfathers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I finally see it. Yeah.
And isn't that language, I think it's beautifully written. It's funny. In fact, it's interesting. The book, for such a short book, has many tonal shifts, but well done. Not terribly. It sort of begins as a little bit of a comedy in a sense. It's a little fun. And then as we go, it gets darker, turns into a Gothic classic. And
so Les Grands-Pères on to your heart, it translates to grandfathers are always wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Footnotes there.
Yeah, mine are in the back, so I have to bounce back and forth. My copy is mine is a Wordsworth Classics. So whatever, if anyone ever comes across this sometime in the future from Wordsworth Classics, you must do better on your covers.
And excuse my French, I'm not very good at it.
Neither am I.
I'm a lot better at German.
Let me finish up these last 3 paragraphs, and I'll reread the other one, and then we'll hop into the first chapter.
Right.
The integration of the shadow, or realization of the personal and conscious, marks the first stage in the analytic process, and that without it, a recognition of the anima and animus is impossible. I believe both of these things happen in this book.
Do you think the integration, the beginning of the integration of the shadows, was when he first saw the picture with the evil grin, or
I think it begins earlier
when he first emotionally assaulted Sybil for her acting?
I think it begins earlier, just through the speech of Lord Henry.
Okay.
I think that's when it sort of begins. I see Lord Henry as his shadow, but I see Lord Henry as his shadow dominating. Now, when you do integration in the Jungian practice, you want to basically remain in control of oneself. You need to know your dark tendencies, know your shames, know your flaws and your weaknesses, and then use that to say, okay, I can integrate you in and understand you, and I can come to please you and mitigate these issues, but you don't ever want your shadow to take control, and then you begin to indulge in revenge and indulge in the things that Dorian starts doing. So his integration is a very unhealthy one. But let me read the line again so you can see kind of how it plays. The integration of the shadow, or realization of the personal unconscious. That's why I think it happens earlier, because Dorian doesn't think of his beauty. It's only when Lord Henry starts talking and comparing him to flowers and
They're in a garden.
he starts...
When he first gets awakened, it's almost like the first bite at the forbidden fruit.
Exactly, yeah. And then the period, or the bold point put onto it, where like the floodgates have opened, I think, is when he first sees the portrait. And he's like, it's like the magic mirror, Sleeping Beauty or something, where it's like, because if you think about it, what does she do in Sleeping Beauty? Is it Snow White, where the witch goes to her and tries to give her... Yes, it's Snow White goes to her and tries to give her the different items, right?
Is it?
It's one or the other. The two are so similar. I believe, let me think. I believe it's... Oh, in the Disney version, she gives the poison apple.
That's Sleeping Beauty.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Sleeping Beauty is a poison apple. I'm sorry. No, Snow White's a poison apple. Sleeping Beauty is the that was put on her that once she turned...
When she pricks her, she pricks on the needle.
She pricks her, yeah.
So the thing that the witch is trying to bring to the girl is a realization of her beauty. So in the original Grimm's version, and we'll have to go back and clarify some of this, but she tries giving her like poisoned items, like a hair piece that would hold her hair, different things that would have the poison in them that were supposed to reveal to her the beauty. And that it's the beauty that the queen realized in herself that made her wicked. So it's a very similar Dorian Gray thing. And so I think that mirror, or the painting, is like a bolt. That's when the floodgates open for Dorian. And
again, it still harkens back to Genesis. It was when they realized they were naked.
They realized they were naked. Yeah.
That's when their sin really, really began.
Excuse me.
Yeah, it's the same. When he realized he was beautiful, he threw himself into the couch. He cried out. He didn't cry out, but his eyes welled up, and he raised himself and he stared at the picture intently. He knew that everything that Henry said was true, and that drove him mad in those moments.
Yeah. So both of these archetypes possess a fatality that can produce tragic results. They are the father and the mother of all disastrous entanglements of fate. Both of these unconscious powers have been recognized as gods. Shadow can only be recognized through a partner, and the anima can only be recognized through a partner of the opposite sex. Self-totality of the psyche, the center and circumference of the conscious and the unconscious ego is the center of that consciousness. So that is our psychological backing for what I'm bringing to the discussion.
Okay.
So that's all Jungian stuff. Should I read the synopsis of Chapter 1?
Do it.
Okay, let's hop into it. Chapter 1. The book starts in the studio, describing trees, birds, and flowers, odors of roses, scents of lilac, honey-colored blossoms, and laburnum, all invited inward with a breeze, the murmur of the bees across the grass. We meet Basil Howard. Basil Howard is someone who had a public disappearance some years ago, causing some excitement and conjecture. Basil is afraid of life and its influence over him. Then we also meet Lord Henry, who tells Basil that what he is currently working on is his best work. Basil, though, wants to hide his work from the public.
Yeah.
Henry says, "A portrait like this would set you far above all the young men in England and make the old men quite jealous. If old..."
My servant Job.
Oh, yeah. "If old men are ever capable of any emotion," but Basil claims he has put too much of himself into the painting to reveal it. Henry sees no resemblance. He is a Narcissus. This is what Henry tells him. He is a Narcissus, and you, well, of course, you have an intellectual expression and all of that, but beauty, real beauty, ends where an intellectual expression begins. Don't flatter yourself, Basil. You are not in the least like him, though Lord Henry has yet to have met him. Henry also calls him Adonai, a beautiful young man beloved by Aphrodite and Venus in the classical myth, who is later killed by a boar, and then he is transformed into a flower. There's a lot of flower references. Narcissus was a beautiful young man who fell in love with his reflection in a fountain. He pined away and was transformed into a flower as well, as Ovid recounts in Metamorphosis. Of course, I am not like him, is Basil's retort. Basil tells Lord Henry his name, saying that he did not intend to tell him what his name was. He wanted to keep him a personal secret. They go into the garden as Henry pries into the subject. Basil says he would not understand, and Henry plucks a pink-petaled daisy and says he would understand while he examines the little golden white feathered disc. As Basil is about to confess his feelings, Henry believes he can hear Basil's heartbeat. This homoeroticism. Basil had previously gone to a party and saw Dorian Gray. He said, "When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew that I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that, if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself." The word fascinating comes from the word fascinum, which means spell. Fascination is a spell that one cannot control, and it comes from within. Basil continues on, "Suddenly I found myself face to face with a young man whose personality had so strangely stirred me. We were quite close, almost touching. Our eyes met again. Dorian told me afterward he, too, felt that we were destined to know each other." The expression face to face suggests an image of God, much like that you see in the story of Jacob, or maybe in Moses after speaking with God, his face is said to be shining. Basil continues to say, "He is all my art to me now," which is a Shakespeare reference to sonnet number 78. "But thou art all my art," addresses the sonneteers to the muse, beauteous and lovely youth. Basil fears he has committed idolatry with his art. Dorian is like both Dionysus and Apollo, as they correspond to Jung's definitions of the self, a God image of the psyche, a self autonomous, an image of what the individual strives towards becoming. One must try not to identify with it, though, for this would be a signal of the psychological inflation. Dorian personifies the Dionysus side of Basil, Basil's own repressed personality, so he feels he needs Dorian as to live through him, to feel alive. Basil will come to be punished by this repression and his idolatry. Basil does not want Henry to meet Dorian, but Dorian has come to visit, and Basil cannot keep Henry away. That is the end of chapter 1.
Right.
Yes. Any thoughts on that?
Basil couldn't keep Henry away because Dorian wouldn't have it. Remember?
That's right. We see that in chapter 2.
Once he, when they were the initial meeting, Basil asked Henry to go away, and Dorian said, "I'm quite tired of sitting.
Yeah.
If he leaves, I have to go."
He also, and I have that in there where he references, he says, "Please stay." When Basil's in a bad mood, it's no fun. And Basil's in a bad mood because he's jealous. He sort of, you get the sense that he fears that Henry will have an influence on him, and he wants no other man to come near his precious statue, his precious art.
Yeah.
So there was I wish I would have brought that Shakespeare book so I could have read that. But what do you think of the idea? And I wonder if Oscar Wilde did this on purpose, because fascination comes later on in the story. That word is used, fascination, to put a spell on somebody, or even this idea of face-to-face as it relates to God. This idea of idolatry, the worship.
Well, Basil, in the first chapter, he pretty much personified the idea of worshiping an idol. He said that he was not just his best work, he was all of his work.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't see anything beyond Dorian. He found him to be the most beautiful creation that he could ever recreate. It was, I believe it was in his introduction where he said, the best art is the use of an imperfect medium perfectly. I think that was it. Yeah, an imperfect medium perfectly. Basil idolized Dorian. Dorian was imperfect. He was the imperfect medium. And it reminded me when I was reading it of the creation story of man. We are man in God's eyes, his favorite creation. Although made imperfectly, we're not like angels. We're not even as powerful as demons, We're formed through clay. We're very fragile. And Dorian was there, not Dorian, Henry was there immediately to show the frailty in Dorian, just as Satan was there immediately to show the frailty in us.
Yeah, in the garden.
Yeah, in the garden.
Yeah, I definitely see a very devilish relationship with.
But you can't help but love Lord Henry. I mean, the paradoxes alone are enough to keep you in. The book is exactly what the term gripping is. You read more of it. I found myself the first time I read it doing the same thing the second time I read it, doing the same thing I did the first time I read it. What is Lord Henry going to say next?
He saved some of his little, what I called Henryisms. I wish I would have written down more, because there were more.
I have quite a few.
Oh, perfect. Any in chapter 1 that you like before I jump into chapter 2?
Yeah, no worries, man. I have quite a few. From the introduction, that this is from Oscar Wilde himself. No artist has ethical sympathies. All ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style. No artist is ever morbid. Thought and language are to the artist instruments of art. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials of art. From the point of view of form, the type of all the artist is the art of the musician. Art is all. I'm sorry, one second. Let's see. All art is at once surface and symbol. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. It is the specter and not the life that art really members. The spectator and not the life that art really mimics. I definitely like that. And as far as chapter 1, and Henry's Henryisms, it is silly for you that there is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. Mm-hmm. I love that one. But beauty, real beauty, ends where intellectual expression begins. Look at how successful men in any learned profession, how perfectly hideous they are. Except, of course, in the church. But then in the church, they don't think. The bishop keeps on saying at the age of 80 what he was told to say as a boy of 18. Natural consequences, he always looks absolutely delightful.
And what a harsh criticism, because you can sit back and go, oh, that's right.
You're saying they're thoughtless. And
and the way he expresses it, you would be espousing the same thing on the pulpit that you would from early. And I'm recognizing that as a pretty damn powerful devilish argument as a Lutheran. Like, as somebody who is a churchgoer, I'm like, ooh, you're on an aesthetic level. That's the criticism, is on an aesthetic level. There is no transformation of the. It's wonderful. He's such a spicy motherfucker, that's for sure.
But the thing is that it was if you remember in chapter 1, he talked about it's thought that ages and wrinkles the forehead. He said,
right. He's talking about, how do you get these ugly lines? How does good morals come up on your face, or even bad morals? How does it appear on your person?
And like he said, he was sure Dorian Gray never thought of anything.
Yeah.
And it turned out that he was that damn innocent.
Right.
He never really did think of anything. Here's another one that he had. It was on marriage. The charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties. That is, I'm not going to admit to that on camera, but yeah, there's some truth.
But it is dangerously true.
Yeah. You never say a moral thing. You never do a wrong thing. Your cynicism is simply a pose. Um, that was Basil to Henry. He never really saw Henry do anything bad. Henry just spoke of doing things bad.
Exactly. And that kind of goes into how he is able to live through Dorian. He himself, and we will later get into this, like when you meet his wife and stuff, you find out Lord Henry's life isn't super extraordinary beyond rubbing shoulders and speaking.
Right.
He doesn't go and do what Dorian does. Not
jock.
Yeah.
19th century.
And I love how later he talks about too, it's sort of like, oh, he's like, I'm studying women, or I'm studying this. It's like, okay. Like he talks about things as if it's like the scientific method, when really, he's just sitting around contemplating and then spewing bullshit. And after he spews bullshit at various dinners, people will ask him, what was it you said, and he'd be like, I completely forgot.
No idea. She is a peacock in everything but beauty. That is a horrible thing to say, but a very polite way to say a horrible thing. Every portrait is painted with feeling. Every portrait that is painted with feeling, rather, is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion.
And this is that, that's a little key to the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
That was a brilliantly put line to me, because that's exactly what, and I always feel when I read this that Dorian was caught in the middle.
Yes.
Of a battle between Basil.
Imagine it like this. Dorian has the little angel and the little devil on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And he's just this naive, he's weak to both. Now, and the thing is Basil has to, and you see it in the narrative, Basil has to slowly, he gets edged out. And it makes me wonder because I still think it would be tragic. What is the story if it was just Basil continuing? And it probably would have turned into a mess of idolatry and God knows what, but it ended up being Lord Henry in this case that continued on. But we'll get to the meat and potatoes of that.
I think what Oscar did was show what we tend to choose.
I think so.
You spend a lot less of your life in church than you do out in the world, in Satan's world.
Mm-hmm.
Dorian spent most of his life with Henry after they met, and less with Basil.
Yeah. And Basil doesn't even have that power of the church. It would be like going to a church with like the most boring priest or, because Basil's not strong in his arguments. He doesn't resist Henry so much in his speech, and he doesn't try to influence. In fact, everything is very secretive. He doesn't want to reveal too much to Dorian, and so he doesn't have a huge power over. It's the other way. Dorian has the power over Basil. He doesn't really know it, but that's sort of how it goes. Whereas Henry sort of has the power over Dorian.
Yeah.
Sort of flipped a little. Do you have more on chapter 1?
Yeah. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good character, and my enemies for their good intellects. Man cannot be too careful in choice of his enemies. I have not gotten one who is a fool. They are all men of some intellectual power, and consequently they all appreciate me. Is that very vain of me? I think it's rather vain.
Man.
Honestly, I think that's the statement of a very confident psychopath. It sounds to me like something that Dr. Lecter would be very comfortable saying.
Well, and it's like, for the rest of us normal people, we have the feeling that our enemies are like these roadblocks that we don't choose. Whereas he's saying, I've chosen mine, and I've chosen wisely. I have the best ones. Yeah. They're the highest intellect, but yet here I am, and they have not overpowered me. Like, it's my choice, and...
Well, I think more of a captivating subject.
Mm-hmm.
He'd rather not choose the weakest. He wants to test his own mettle against the toughest opponent said he can. That's why his friends aren't the toughest. His enemies are.
Right. Basil is weak.
That's probably...
Dorian is weak.
Yeah, they're both weak, but that's probably why he has this very snappy retort to everything that's said to him at the dinner table with his Aunt Agatha, because he's gone up against the biggest, the baddest, the toughest. He's figured out ways to beat them intellectually. And that's what makes him so fascinating to the aristocratic society. that he belongs to.
Mm.
I have to envy him for that. In a way, I have to not envy, but admire him.
Yeah, of course. Well, he is admired, and I think that throughout this podcast, you'll see Henry will be the main subject of the discussion for the most part.
Okay.
He is like the main character in a lot of ways.
And again, you pointed it out. All of his friends are weak. All of his enemies are strong. That also puts him in a position with the friends. He's artificially propped up.
Mm-hmm.
Always going to follow him. It's almost a cult following.
Yeah.
I mean, Dorian was, for lack of a better term, in love with him at first sight.
Right. He blushes.
Yeah. Basil, I trust you, Henry. Please don't do this.
Yeah.
But he reveals to him his deepest secrets anyway, Dorian's identity and everything.
Yeah. He gets trampled in this first. He's like, shit, I told you his name, didn't I? I didn't mean to do that. I don't want you to meet him. All right, he's here. What the fuck?
Yeah, right. So the next one, I suppose it comes from the fact that none of us can stand other people having the same faults as ours.
Yeah.
How true is that?
It's very true.
That is fucking true.
Oftentimes, that's where I find my faults, and I go, that's where I'm like, that's what's wrong with me.
I can't remember where I got it from, but it says the things you like less about other people are traits you've seen in yourself, especially when it comes to your kids. And as I've examined that statement, I can't for the life of me remember where it came from. I found it to be more and more true. The hard-headedness of my kids, and each one has their special type. Or with people who I associate with, people who I call my friends, or even people that I just outright can't stand to be around.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how much of, if I sit back and objectively think about it, how much of myself they remind me of.
I'm specifically thinking of one character. I won't go into the details because we both know some of these people.
Right.
But thinking of the character as an example, he is this type of person who is like just that. I mean, mainly just that flavor of a sort of audacity that I don't really like in myself. If it goes too far, if it becomes too boisterous or too loud or too
Proud and too
proud, overbearing. And when I see it in action, I think, my God, because this individual is basically a one-note character, a one-note flavor, and it's definitely a flavor I see in myself. It's like a man of action. Even before thought, that's where you end up kind of in hot water sometimes.
I think I know what pseudo-intellectual you're talking.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely pseudo-intellectual, and it's a type of character that I don't like to spend too much time around. But the things that I see in this person is something I definitely see in myself, and I go, ugh.
And you try to fight it.
Try to fight us. Yeah.
Thing. This particular person. There's some good traits about this.
Absolutely. Highly educated, self-educated.
Where the person
good memory
wrong at is that this person feels he knows more than everyone in the room, right?
This is a problem I have.
Not necessarily true, or even it's not obviously true in any way. But the confidence that this person brings behind it is even more insulting.
Yeah. And this is the problem I see in myself. And so when I see it in them, I go, oh boy, I have done this, and it's a beautifully frustrating thing that is well written in this for sure.
Another one that we picked out, I like persons better than principles.
Wow.
And I like persons with no principles better than anything else in the world.
I think I have that in my list.
Yeah. That came after the more insincere the man is, the more purely intellectual the idea will be. This was the one I liked the most. Now that I'm pointing this one out. I'm going to start that one over.
Yeah.
The more insincere the man is, the more purely intellectual the idea will be. As in that case, it will not be colored by either his wants, desires, or his prejudices.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so profoundly true.
I could see it as being definitely dangerously true.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to get to it in any objective meaning. Like for example, if I was to say, really like these Levi jeans. I fucking love them. They're the best. Saying that they're the best was all automatically disqualified by my previous statement that
Sure.
I love them.
Sure.
You know, there's no objective meaning in it, and that goes. You can extrapolate that out through any philosophy, or any science. Like, for instance, with the environment and stuff like that. If you feel it and you're not detached from it sufficiently enough that you can take or leave the results, then you're not objective. You're not a sound reference point for anyone to get their information from. You have to almost not care about it either way and just give a pure side.
Now, this is where I see Lord Henry as a very powerful, sort of silver-tongued demon. And the thing is, so I'm thinking about what he said and put it up against thinkers like Jung or Nietzsche, right? I believe that both of these men had conviction within their thought process, especially I'm beginning to read Nietzsche. I'm very, very early on, but I have begun to read Beyond Good and Evil. And I'm seeing that the way he gets through his thought process is by kind of feeling out his own belief system. He has an invested interest. He has no issue contradicting it. But I do think that both of these great thinkers, although not always right, of course, no one can always be right.
No.
But I think at least most often correct or most often close to the truth, yet they have the conviction and they have their, what would you say, their invested interest in the ideas, but you can still arrive at these truths. And so up against the argument posed by Lord Henry, as true as it is, I think it is packaged in a way that could lead you astray. And I think that's what a lot of his beautiful speaking does, is like he poses the argument that if you were Dorian, you're fucked. You're not going to find any way out of that cage. You're not going to see the paradoxes or the contradictions or any of that. You're going to be trapped because they are so well-formed, beautifully said, and powerfully close to the truth, but usually missing the nuance to point too close to the truth. And the other thing, I think that what he just said is a reflection of himself. I don't think he cares too much about what he is saying. It's just, here's the thought in my mouth, and I'm going to go ahead and just say it, And it's powerful.
Here's one that I found interesting. It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That I actually had to stop for a second and think about that. If you know your premises, you know the axioms that you come from, what's the point in arguing with anyone?
We meet a character later on, they say, who is silent because he said everything he needed to say before. And it made me think, I think that that's right, because I know that I am lost. I'm searching through the weeds in these dead philosophers, and, well, not everyone's dead, but...
Let me give you my contrast of Nietzsche and Jung, all right?
Yeah.
Like you were saying that, like we were both speaking a minute ago, you have to be somewhat separated from it. Now, Nietzsche and Jung, to me, were both trying to examine the same thing, but they were trying to examine it from two different points. Now, these are going to be psychological points. They're not going to be physical points of reference. Mm-hmm. Nietzsche was examining life through the lens of his own feelings, and him, like you said, feeling things out. And I believe that a lot of don't get me wrong, I love to read Nietzsche.
Yeah.
But a lot of his works, I feel that he was seeing them through the lens of his own emotions, his own thought processes. It was all about his mind's eye. Jung, on the other hand, attempted to step outside of himself and watch the emotions as they passed by, so to speak, and try to rationalize them from a third person. I don't think Nietzsche did that. And I think Nietzsche was very successful. And if I had to say who was like the smartest of the two, it would definitely, to me, be Nietzsche. I think that even some think tanks or people who study this have rated Nietzsche as having the highest IQ of any man that ever lived.
And you also wouldn't have much of a Jung without him in a lot of ways.
But I think that Jung had something that Nietzsche didn't have, and I think Nietzsche was kind of a how do I say it? Not a narcissist, but uh, he believed too much in his own abilities. I don't think Jung did. I think Jung accepted the fact that he was um, he was torn in between the two worlds of the conscious and the unconscious, and he needed to be able to step back and observe the two interact and counteract each other. I don't think Nietzsche ever really, even if he spoke about it, and he did in symbols and like thus spoke Zarathustra, but I don't think he ever really did. I think it all boiled down to his view, not the view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I put that clearly enough.
I think so. Yeah. I'm excited to read more of him. I don't think I would ever be able to do a comparison of the two intellects battling out because they seem like two giants. I mean, I was reading the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil, and it was one of those things that I get like when I read Neumann. It's like I'll read the page and I'll be like, I think I know what he means. And then maybe I'll get to the second page and then it's almost like a flipped argument against it. Like in the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil, I noticed there was a lot of like, he was basically making this argument about why you shouldn't listen to philosophers. And then he's like, well, now let me set up this philosophy for you. And I was like, wait, did he really say that? And I went back and read it and I'm like, motherfucker, you're kind of like up here. And so I think that,
his contradictions were pointed out by other philosophers. Now, it doesn't take anything away from Nietzsche.
Oh, I think it was brilliant what he was trying to say. He was setting you up to be on guard for what he was about to tell you and say, look, you need to not just easily get it. He basically, it's almost as if Lord Henry would have met Dorian and said, although I don't think he's a very Lord Henry type character, but I think it'd almost be like if Lord Henry came in and said, Dorian, you must be very careful when I speak because some of what I say may get you burned. But of course, Lord Henry never gives you that courtesy. Whereas Nietzsche is intelligent enough to know that people get carried away with ideas.
Yeah.
And he's setting it up and saying, look, I'm about to go into some shit here. Be very careful of people who speak in such a manner. I think was brilliant. And it's something that when I'm reading the work, a lot of it goes right over my head, just like I was saying with Neumann. A lot of Neumann's work is right over my head. Same with Jung, too. But should I dive into chapter 2?
No, go ahead. I wanted to pull up something that that you brought up. It reminded me of something here. It was Intellectuals in Society. It was a book that I read a while ago. It's a pretty heady read. It's good, but there is a quote in this where,
Excuse me.
The ideas, right? We were talking about his ideas. I think that Nietzsche knew what the author of Intellectuals in Society knew, and he apologized for in the beginning. He like you said, he set you up for the possibility. Listen, don't fall into this trap. I'll read you this this excerpt from the book. Oh, not from the book. It's a comment from the author that comments on the excerpt from the book. And it's about a philosopher that we all know, a neuroscientist named Sam Harris. Sam Harris is exactly the type of intellectual that Soul had in mind when he wrote Intellectuals in Society in 2010. These guys know everything and have all the right answers. The most clever rhetorical flourishes and verbal dexterity. Yet, they all have one thing in common. No track record of getting it right, no accomplishment in anything real or in the real world, and they all pay no career or reputational price when they get it wrong. You know, I think that Nietzsche knew. That's why he always prefaced it that way. Don't fall into these, but here's mine.
Yeah. That's something I've always wondered about, the danger of my own current status when talking about these things and jumping back into it was up until recently, I basically was living a pretty damn good life of success. And for a long time, it gave me a very false confidence that I kind of knew that I was honing in on the right philosophy, the way to go about life. And recently I started thinking about, well, how the hell could I talk about it now when I've had such a rocky, tumultuous of life right now, or what I've just recently gone through. I just spent some time in prison. I lost my job. Like, am I really the guy who should be talking about, how to maybe interpret certain things and then apply it to life?
I don't see why it wouldn't be with you or anyone. The lens that you see it through may not be the lens that the majority of the world sees it through. But it's a good percentage of people who might see it the way that you see it or the way that I see it and be immensely helped by the message, how you put it.
Well, I'm hoping that I'm coming at it anyway, at least from a much more humble position. I don't regret my life or how it's panned out. In fact, I've been having quite an interesting experience throughout my life, traveling the world, to get it. Yeah. Having the prison experience is something I don't think I'd ever want to give up. Getting into some trouble, getting into some action, having some liveliness, having something to go up against. I mean, for the past 4 years, dealing with courts and the challenging of my soul. I've been exhausted. I've been struggling. I've been getting through it all. And so life is definitely interesting. I'm not living a mundane life, and I thank God for that. But I'm also able now, I think, to come from a much more humble position. Like, if you would have met me in high school, I was a very much of a Lord Henry kind of guy. I would sit and I'd just be spewing bullshit all day long with no experience to back any of it up. But now I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I think. I'm probably wrong. Maybe I'm close to the truth, but I also accept that, 10 episodes down the line, I'm going to come back and say, actually, I have a different idea on this point from before, and come at it like...
Well, that's what this whole thing was about, right?
Yeah.
Trying to learn more about ourselves, and we're trying to learn with the audience more about the world. Like we said in previous episodes, neither one of us are classically educated in any of this. It's just a
subject of interest.
Yeah. We're just interested in these subjects. We read about them in depth, and we want to share our thoughts with you.
I would say too, I am passionately in love with narrative. I always have been. That's why the only degree I have is a measly associate's degree, but in film. But I would put the badge of honor myself to say that I'm the type of person that Dawkins would say is drunk on symbols. I'm extremely drunk on symbols. I'm very proud of it, because I do think there's a lot of great scientists that I have an interest in who seem to be developing theories, especially now that AI is being developed, starting to understand that the human mind is a very symbolic thing. It's sort of how the brain categorizes. And one of the things that AI struggles with is seeing the world and categorizing the world. And so it's like, but the human mind is extremely efficient at
the mind from the brain, because the two aren't the same.
I'm talking mind. Yeah, I'm talking mind. How does the mind work? So chapter 2,
let's go.
And these get shorter as we go. Oh, you got another one?
Women have no appreciation of good looks. At least good women don't. But we'll leave that one.
Chapter 2. When Dorian first sees Henry, he blushes. Henry finds him to be beautiful and thinks to himself, no wonder Basil worshipped him. Lord Henry, after introductions, goes to leave, but Dorian asks him to stay, pointing to Basil's sulky mood for not wanting to be alone with him. The mood comes from Basil's jealousy. Only then does Basil insist that Henry stays, as he never wants to displease Dorian. Basil paints, too distracted to hear Henry's conjectures. Quote, I believe that if one man were to live out life fully and completely, were to give form to every feeling, expression to every thought, reality to every dream, I believe that the world would gain such a fresh impulse of joy that we would forget all the maladies of medievalism and return to the Hellenic idea. Every impulse that we strangle broods in the mind and poisons us. Dorian begs Henry to stop saying that which bewilders him. He was dimly conscious that entirely fresh influences were at work within him, yet they seemed to him to have come really from himself. They had touched some secret chord that had never been touched before, but that he felt was now vibrating and throbbing to curious pulses. Lord Henry, that one portion I think is very vibrating and throbbing, He knew what he was doing.
Right.
Lord Henry knew when to be quiet and to let influences take effect. He studied Dorian as this happened. It was this effect that Basil needed to complete his art, the expression that it causes on Dorian, though Basil was not aware of what created the look within Dorian. After finishing the art, Dorian goes to the garden and buries his face in lilac blossoms. Henry followed him out and told him, "You are quite right to do that. Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul," reaffirming his earlier argument. Dorian was interested and afraid of Henry, and ashamed of his fear, leaving us only in the playing field of sin. Saying he spoke like music and had hands like flowers, he felt that Henry disclosed life's secrets. Then Henry tells Dorian that he is beautiful and must protect his youth from the sun. They leave that ever-watching eye for the shade, and Henry tells Dorian that his youth is his virtue, and that it will someday fade to age, that wrinkles are ugly. He says that his current beauty is genius and that it is divine and undeniable. He tells him that once beauty fades, so does the purpose of life. Tells him not to waste the gift. Maybe he feels he has wasted his own, or never had so much of it to begin with, and now wants to witness someone do what he could not. He says, "Be always in search for new sensations. Be afraid of nothing. A new hedonism." Hedonism being the doctrine that originated with Aristippus in the 4th century, in which the pursuit of pleasure is regarded as the chief good and proper aim. The new sensation that Henry is talking about is for Dorian to be hedonistic through art as art itself. It's found on page 104 in mine anyway. He warns Dorian that we turn into puppets, haunted by the memories of passions which we were too afraid to realize. Is this how Lord Henry sees himself? And does he not want to go from puppet to puppet master? In chapter 3, Henry also contemplates how fun it is to play with Dorian, saying it is like playing upon an exquisite violin. Then Basil joins them outside to announce the painting is being finished, or he's about to finish it. As Dorian saw it, he felt he saw himself for the first time. A sense of his own beauty entered him. Then he realized that his beauty would fade with age, but this painting would remain a capture of the gifts he once had. Then he becomes bitter, feeling that his friendship with Basil has been revealed with its true idolatry and uncovered. Then Dorian says the words that set the curse. "I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it were only the other way, if the picture could change, and I could always be what I am now."
It's a beautiful statement, though. Every photo, every minute that passes gives that photo more and takes away from you. If you go back and just look up your first Marine photo.
Right.
Time has been good to that photo.
Yeah.
It's amazing, right?
Sure.
Compared to the guy that we've become, not mentally, I'm just talking about physically. If I go back and I find one of my old track pictures, it's just like, man, that kid was blessed.
Yeah.
That kid is, in that photo, is still blessed.
And as I sit here, I think too, like, I don't care so much about the imagery. I did when I was younger, actually, which is why I think Dorian has to begin as young, because like now looks are not much of a concern of mine, not as much as they used to be. But the physical side of it is the thing that I probably envy now, maybe more so because I have gained more weight, but I've always had a bad back. But right now I have possibly like a bulging disc or like a pulled muscle. I have something going on with my back. And I'm thinking, damn, like I could have picked my gal up in my 20s and like run like a 5 mile or something. But now I can't I picked her up and I heard a dull thud that,
Could do a rescue scene in a movie. Running uphill.
yeah, fireman carries and dragons, all that shit. I can't, yeah. And so that's the part I do probably envy. Not in some sick way, though. That's for sure.
No, but for somebody like Dorian,
Yeah, I understand it completely.
but that goes back to that part in chapter 2. Go ahead and finish your synopsis, because chapter 2 was one of my favorites.
Okay, yeah. I think it was one of the longest too, right?
Yeah, it was pretty long. This is before he goes and talks to his uncle and gets the history of Dorian.
Yeah. Of course, then Basil is surprised. He had never seen this charming boy act in this way, and he knows to blame Henry. Then Basil goes to destroy the painting, but Dorian stops him, claiming it would be murder. Then the butler brings in the drinks and breaks up the scene. Dorian invites himself to the theater with Henry, forgetting previous appointments that he had with Basil, striking jealousy within him again. But he says he would rather stay with the portrait. This is Basil, would rather stay with the portrait, which he claims is the real Dorian. He sort of says it, I think, as a joke in a sense, but there's some truth in it, so I wrote that in there. Lord Henry has a fascination with Dorian as well, although very different. Dorian lives, and this is the point I think I made earlier, Dorian lives the life of youth that Lord Henry wants, what he feels he had but since lost. He too represses the Dionysian side. He tries to experience this through Dorian as well, though his is more of an experiment, which he refers to it as an experiment later on. In real life, Oscar Wilde had a relationship with and a fascination with Lord Alfred Douglas. Wilde once wrote to him, "I can't live without you. You are the atmosphere of beauty through which I see life. You are the incarnation of all lovely things." Later, in Dorian Gray, Basil confesses his idolatry in a very similar way. Mind you, that letter was written after the book's publication, showing that real life does imitate fiction often because the unconscious is more aware of the conscious and crops up into reality through art, fiction, and dreams. And I do believe that the unconscious here was speaking through Wilde in a way that would later speak through him once again in his real life. Just showing that some things are obviously with a genius like Oscar Wilde, and I will say genius, you can't read this and look at the way he plays with the language and structure and not think that he's a literary genius, but that genius is absolutely, as it must be, paired with the accidental, the unconscious. And just reading this, I'm not always sure which one is which is what makes it wonderful, but I am sure that seeing how Oscar, the little I know, I want to do more research on him. I guess he's got a publication of his letters, but seeing how his real life plays out very similar, like his divorce with his wife and his secret relationship with this lord, and how the fiction and real life play together, showing the unconscious manifesting. Anyway,
I get that. It reminds me of a line from a movie from back in the day. It was the first Pirates of the Caribbean, and when he was in the little dinghy boat, he turned it upside down.
mm-hmm.
He goes underwater with it, and Orlando Bloom says, "This is either genius or madness." And he said, "It's amazing how often those two traits coincide."
Mm-hmm.
If I remember right, when Oscar wrote this book, he was actually very sick.
Right, I believe. Yeah, you told me that.
He was actually on a boat in the Pacific. He was traveling, and he was very sick when he wrote the book. And he had to be going mad a little bit, and his intellect shined through in the pages of this book. But chapter 2 is probably the most annotated chapter that I have, because there were so many little flashes of brilliance in it. For instance, the aim of life is self-development, to realize one's nature perfectly. That came from a quote about influence, because Harry was saying that he hated influence. He said that influence was evil. Because to influence a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts, or burn with his natural passions. His virtues are not real to him. His sins, if there are such things, are borrowed. He becomes an echo of someone else's music, an actor of a part that has not been written for him. That is what each of us is here for. People are afraid of themselves nowadays. They have forgotten the highest of all duties, the duty that one owes to oneself.
And this is what he does to Dorian.
Yeah. But there was no lie in that statement. It's
No.
as it was put to Dorian in order to tarnish him. The statement is true.
Well, and he can present it to Dorian without too much guilt, because we see no character in the book that has that influence over Lord Henry.
Yeah,
Lord Henry doesn't subject himself to it. He can practice it onto somebody else as one of his experiments, whether he's but
there was one character in the book that was immune to it. His wife.
yes,
But I never know what he thinks until I hear it
from somebody else.
Yeah.
Which shows that she's hyper aware of how so he's done this to somebody before.
Yeah. His machinations don't work on him, on her.
Right.
At all.
Yeah, they're very separate. We meet her once, right?
Yeah.
I believe only one time.
Wow. I didn't think about that. That was a good thing to point out. There was no one over him, not even his old uncle.
No, because when he sits there and when Lord Henry's talking to like his aunt or talking to anyone around him, he's always seems to be dominating.
Right.
He always, and then if anything comes up in which he's uncomfortable with, before he gets his moment to shine, he'll use quippy humor as like a defense mechanism. So he'll actively disengage with a subject until something takes place where he's like, oh, I can hop in now. And then he'll start playing and he will become center stage. He's like,
I'm starting not to like this guy. He reminds me of me.
I don't think we're supposed to like him. I mean, I love him, but
he's great.
But I don't I wouldn't want to meet him. I don't want to be around him.
I think I would like to meet him.
Would you?
Yeah, I think I would like to, but I'm a silly character anyway, so.
Yeah, I'm still not ready to come face to face with the devil, and he's not total devil status, but he's definitely like a demonic character as far as like mythology goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Another few notes that I made in this was he has this statement: the body sins once, it has and has done with its sin, for action is the mode of purification. Nothing remains then but the recollection of pleasure or the luxury of regret. The only way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with longing for the things that it has forbidden to itself. With the desire for what is monstrous, laws have made monstrous and unlawful.
He plays with this idea a few times.
Yeah.
He plays with it with the advice that he gives the Duchess. He plays with this idea of maybe the first time you do it, that's the sin, but you must return to it, or this idea of committing some cruel act or some kind of sickness, but the more you do it, it no longer.
Conversation where she was like,
"How do I stay youthful?"
Yeah, he said, "Remember all the mistakes you made and go and make them again."
Yeah, he returns to this idea again and again and again. I have this sense that Lord Henry, though it's not just blatantly spelled out, that Lord Henry is full of his own regrets and builds a philosophy around this idea that I think he probably wishes he would have practiced more. So maybe not end up getting married, ending up with this woman that he clearly has no interest in, and would have truly, like one of the things, it's a contradiction that comes up later, but he tells Dorian, he's like, you're lucky that some girl committed suicide over you. And I think that Lord Henry in a lot of ways wished he could have done a lot of what he's saying. And I think that's one of them. Returning to whatever his sins may have been. He has a discussion later on about a girl that he had a little relationship with, and it being fun, but eventually just turned out to be some old thing where now when they see each other at dinner parties, he's bored by her.
That's interesting that you say that he wishes he would have done some of the things he said, because there was a quote in the book where, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was a lot of people don't realize they need the advice that they give.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
But that's a what you gonna call it? It's not the exact quote, but it's something along those lines.
Paraphrasing.
Yeah, paraphrase was loosely quoted there. Another one was that you already talked about curing the soul, but you know more than you think you know, just as you know less than you want to know.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Socrates. I'm the wisest man in the world, for I know nothing.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite quotes.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
The whole basis of a philosophy almost, and it came in such a strange manner, almost a mythology built around it. Because what you have is there's a bunch of these wise men who get together and they all know Socrates essentially, and they go to the what are they called? What are they called? The ladies on the mountain.
Not sirens.
No, not sirens. Oh my goodness. Mind. Well, everyone would know, I guess, if they come across the time on this later on, that it's 12 o'clock at night. So forgive certain lapses. What was that flash? Was that just the mouse?
There's the entire screen. There it goes again.
Let me make sure.
The time is still moving.
I'll check YouTube here in a second. Delphi, the oracles of Delphi.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so these wise men, and I'll make this quick because this is not the point of our thing, but the oracles of Delphi. So these wise men go up there, and that's the question that they ask them, is they say, they ask it as a joke, sort of, and they say, is Socrates truly the wisest man in the world? And they're surprised by the answer. The oracle says, yes, he is. And they're like, what? They expected some vague, because what you would typically get from the oracles is like these vague, poetic, like questions back at you that you would go home, contemplate it on, and then solve your problems. This is a common practice, like in shamanistic practices. You give people like a hymn, and then they go back and the hymn might not be totally related on their problem, but what you've caused them to do is contemplate their problem long enough that they find answers.
It reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Which part? Because I just read that.
What's the meaning of existence?
Oh, yeah.
And deep thought. Deep thought number one, they go to them and come back in 2,000 years.
Oh, right.
2,000 years. What's the answer to the life, universe, and everything? 42. What do you mean?
And I don't know, he must have done this on purpose, but the time period of when it's written is kind of interesting. But the answer, too, is a little bit of a programming joke.
Oh, it's I can't remember what religion it is. I want to say it's in Kabbalah, but 42 is the basis of everything that is built by God.
Right. Well, and 42 used in programming is used to encapsulate everything. So when you need to like move your script, so like when I used to build websites, if I needed to move something, I would use the symbol, but I would use 42. There's a symbol, a quick key you can use, sort of like a quick key, but it will capture everything of your program and you can move it around. But the joke is that it's everything, which is funny. But anyway, so the oracle, the wise men come back from the oracle. They're like, Jesus Christ. Well, they wouldn't have said Jesus Christ, but they say, holy crap, Socrates, we found out that you are the wisest man in the world. The oracles have said so. And you got to think Socrates was a man who believed in the oracle. And so this put him into a bit of a conundrum because he felt a contradiction inside of himself. And then he finally was able to figure out through that contemplation and say, oh, maybe my wisdom comes from me knowing what I do not know. I know where to search. I know where to look. I know the answers, or I know the questions that I must ask.
Yeah.
And so that's where that whole thing comes from.
No,
it's a great story.
I can't remember if it was Peterson or who it was that explained that philosophy to me. I know Dr. Thomas Sowell has he says it the same way, but he says it in a very he says the same thing, but in a very different way. It takes a large amount of knowledge just to realize the extent of your own ignorance. But basically, if you can imagine a circle, all right, everything inside the circle you know. Everything that the line of the circle touches, you know is there, but you don't know about. Everything outside of the circle, you don't know. As you learn about everything in the line of the circle, the circle grows. And the more that it grows, the more that you can't know. The more knowledge you get, the more exponential the knowledge that you don't have becomes. You never eat into it. It can only continue to flourish beyond what you know. That's what I think that's what I think we're getting to in that particular statement. Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about the influence and stuff like that. Yeah. So the next one. All right. I have a lot of things. The Faustian deal, scoffing at the creator, interesting concepts, but the thing that got me was that in this chapter is when I realized that Henry was Satan, all right, and that Dorian basically bit the apple when he found his vanity, and not only did he bite the apple and find his vanity, he had an unauthorized relationship at that point with Henry. Not necessarily physical, but it was not what was permitted necessarily by Basil. Basil being the more godly figure, and Henry being the Satanist type of figure. But what was said that brought me to the idea that he was scoffing at the creator was this excerpt right here. The painter stared in amusement. It was so unlike Dorian to speak like that. What had happened? He seemed quite angry. His face was flushed and his cheeks were burning. Yes, he continued, I am less to you than your ivory Hermes or your silver fawn. You like them always. How long will you like me? Till I have my first wrinkle, I suppose. I know now that when one loses good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. And when I thought about this, I kept I kept thinking about the image that we were made in the image of God. But we do something that God never does. We shrivel up, we get weaker, and we die. Angels don't. Demons don't. They'll be in the presence of God forever, and so will we, but not in this form. And so, yeah, we lash out at God because we're the ones who have to go through this process. Even though the process, if you think about it from God's point of view, this is beautiful. You get to experience life. You get to experience love. You get to experience love for the Creator without complete knowledge for it. This is what that part represented to me. The creation, Dorian, was turning against his creator, Basil. And remember, Basil wanted to destroy the painting, just like God wanted to destroy man at one point, and Dorian protested against it, and Basil said, fine, it's your painting.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it to you. Almost like he gave Noah, listen, okay, fine, I won't destroy the world, but you're going to.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like Dorian comes in, he sees it. First, he can, for the first little couple lines, there's like adoration, like, oh, wow. And then there's the realization, oh, wow. And then it's like, damn you for this creation. And the creator said, okay, fine, damn the creation. but then the created sort of pops up and says, wait. It's an interesting, quickly too, within what, a page and a half?
It's just a half a page.
Half a page. You go through this thing where it is interesting because and he's right. He says, if you do that, that's like committing murder. And it's like he says something so right, so on the head of the nail, let's say, but without knowing how correct he is. And it's an interesting switch. It's like you said, I like the comparison to God and his creators. It's like I sit here and I know that sin is real, that the world's a pretty nasty place, and yet I don't want to give it up.
No.
And I have at times lashed out at God and gone, damn you, and all that. And
because none of the angels in heaven are having to deal with or having to experience what we're having to experience here. And it kind of makes you, want to look up at God and be like, well, could you maybe one of them? What do I have to age? What do I have to go decrepit? What do I have to die? They don't. And they know your story 100%. So they have the benefit of knowing. They don't have to have faith.
Yeah.
There's no faith in them at all, and they can rebel. But we have to have faith and not rebel. I think that this was Dorian's understanding of the creation story. The first 2 chapters was a creation story remake in a sense. And here is the interesting thought right here. We both agree that Lord Henry is kind of a Satan figure. I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. Remember, Satan was jealous of man because God said, look at what I've created. This is the best yet. Well, what about us? Satan was saying, all right, I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Now, if man was created in God's image, just like this portrait was created through Basil, the image in his mind of Dorian.
Yeah. And I would argue in some way of himself, because he kind of reiterates that a lot. He doesn't say exactly specifically what it is, but he says, of myself is in this.
Right. When
there's that connection.
You were created in the image of God, it means every part of it, the emotions, the abilities to rationalize, things like that. It's not just the physical image. What else was created in the image of God? Were the angels not created in the image of God? And those fallen angels who became the demons and Satan that we know, were they not created in the image of God initially? I think that most likely they were. They were just, they weren't the exact same as us. And when God made those image, like when Basil made the image of Dorian, it mocked the angels. They were like, these things are weak. They're petty, just like with Dorian. Why would you make this? It just convicts me. I'm going to see it. I won't be this. That's how it struck me. It was an interesting thought. I think as far as the chapter, I have a lot more notes in it, but those were the most pressing thoughts that I really dug that chapter. It was great. It's so somber, so depressing. Sin is the only real color element left in modern life. How do you think about that? The young men want to be faithful and are not old. Old men want to be faithless and cannot. That's all one can say. All right, chapter 3, buddy.
Yeah. One comment on the comment of sin. It's one of those things that Lord Henry says that is true and yet is missing an element that could deceive. I do think that he is correct that sin is the color of life. But that's true. But the missing truth is that the struggle against sin is what makes it so colorful. I believe that's the missing truth. You could fall in and say, well, then we ought to just be hedonists because that would bring color to the world. But I do think that it is like you need something to fight against. That's what makes the beauty of the world. The beauty of the world to me is the tragedy in a lot of ways. A lot of atheists, and one of the arguments I had I used to be an atheist, was that like, God, how could you do this? How could you make this cruel world? Blah, 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 blah. We've all kind of heard that argument. Well, to me, that is where the tragedy is, in a lot of ways, the beauty of the world, because it forces one to awaken and act. And that's where a lot of again, my whole philosophy, almost my religion, is that narrative is man.
About this in our second half that was kind of deleted.
Yeah.
A rich man who liked to bring poor people into his house and feed them gourmet food.
Yeah.
Because even though he got to eat this every day. It was nothing special. So he gained his pleasure from watching people who didn't get to eat this every day.
It's like the sin of Marie Antoinette. She says, let them eat cake. She doesn't understand.
Right.
Later on, she offers her head because she begins to understand. And maybe that sacrifice of hers and that understanding of hers is some sort of redemption, some sick, twisted redemption. But for somebody who lives a life like that, she was so young, she was so naive, she was so spoon and mouth type thing. It really is the struggles of life that I find to be beautiful. And that is all inclusive of the tragedies.
Is it the struggle of life that finds it to be beautiful, or is it the struggle that contrasts the ugly?
Yes, you need the contrast to see the beautiful, but I also think that the ugliness can be beautiful, but it also depends on perspective. And it's a constant battle. So for instance, it's the ugliness that creates Hitler, but it is Hitler that if you have the correct perspective, you can become the warrior to fight against. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the two things happen to us. We see people become embittered. We see people playing naive, but we also find our heroes, and we can find the hero within ourselves against these struggles, against our struggles of ourselves, trying to battle our own ugliness, sometimes battling other people's ugliness, and the whole thing. So that's the missing element. I think Lord Henry is telling the truth. Sin has some beauty. There is some beauty in the flaws. What I was saying earlier off mic was that sin is just missing the mark, as translated. And that's the idea, that when you sin, you're just not aiming at the highest good, a sort of Jordan Peterson thing. But that flaw of the world, I mean, we have so many things that we're up against. Not even just sinful things. We have arbitrary things. We have disease. We have natural disaster. We have the elements. We invent things. I mean, now we tend to kind of invent things out of comfort and efficiency, but there was a time when we had to come up with heating and air conditioning and put a ceiling over our heads. And, the struggle is what made us, I think, so beautiful. And that includes all the things that Anyway, so ready, chapter 3?
Yeah. I was just looking for that one. Nothing of beauty ever came. I'm gonna have to paraphrase this. It was everything that's beautiful came from something tragic. Yeah, that was another quote in the book.
So chapter 3. And these get shorter as I go. Henry then goes to see his uncle and learns of Dorian's past. He kind of knew this before, but I wrote it as this to sum it up, learns that Dorian is the last of Lord Kelso's grandchildren, son of the extraordinary, beautiful Margaret Devereux. Margaret Devereux. She used to make men frantic by running away with this penniless young fellow who was later killed in a duel, which was antagonized by Lord Kelso himself.
How does that mirror Romeo and Juliet?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of the forbidden love and the pennilessness of the status of Romeo to Juliet.
Capulets versus the Montagues, yeah.
Margaret was then forced to live with Kelso under the condition that she must never talk of the poor dead nobody she was newly wed to. As Lord Henry sums up the events after hearing them, he says, or he thinks, this is not in quotes necessarily, but this is how he thinks of it, it had stirred him by its suggestion of a strange, almost modern romance, a beautiful woman risking everything for a mad passion, a few wild weeks of happiness cut short by a hideous, treacherous crime, months of violent, voiceless agony, and then a child born in pain, the mother snatched away by death, the boy left to solitude and the tyranny of an old and loveless man, describing him as the son of love and death. Then, forgive me. Let me start over. Then Henry goes to have dinner with his aunt, Lady Agatha, where he finds that Dorian is present, along with the Duchess of Harley, a lady of admirable good nature and good temper, Sir Thomas Burden, a radical member of Parliament, Mr. Erskine, an old gentleman of considerable charm and culture, who was silent. This is the one who quit speaking after 30.
This is at the dinner.
Mrs. Vanderloo, a saint amongst women. Lord, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, an intelligent, middle-aged man of mediocrity. He walks in as they're discussing the marriage of Mr. Dartmoor to an American woman, in which Lady Agatha thinks someone should interfere. Lord Henry says that he thinks humanity takes itself too seriously, and that it is our original sin. The Duchess becomes interested in the philosophies, though he is really playing to Dorian. She asks, as the subject comes up, how she could regain some vitality and youth. He says she must revisit her regrets and sins, but this time reenact them, but with only pleasure and none of the shame. Sir Thomas declares it is a dangerous theory. Lord Henry continues to explain that this is how we age and that we ultimately die from our common sense.
Yeah.
Oscar Wilde then goes on to abstractly describe how Lord Henry gets carried away with himself, and the theory is described as iridescent with fancy, a winged paradox. Facts fled before her being his comment matured into a full theory personified as a woman like I don't even know how to pronounce this, Bacchante, an ivory-draped, wine-inspired female princess of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine known to the Greeks as Dionysus.
Bacchanalia.
There we go. He felt that the eyes of Dorian Gray were fixed on him. It says that Dorian, as well as the audience, was under a sort of spell, following his pipe, in a reference to the children following the Pied Piper. Later he tells Mr. Erskine that I quite forget what I said, and asked if it was bad. Mr. Erskine says it was very bad and even dangerous, and he's afraid of his influence over the Duchess. Lord Henry then announces that he is leaving, as well as everyone else, but that he wants to take a stroll in the park, and then Dorian asks to join him. Chapter 3, there it is.
Yeah. And he tells Dorian, absolutely, but I won't be talking.
Yeah.
Just be observing things. This chapter, I think, was just his bait. He had already enticed, well, not a bait. This was, let me change that. He threw the bait to Dorian in the second chapter. He reels him in this chapter because everything he said at the table, you notice he didn't say it to Dorian. He said it around Dorian, with his specific target being Dorian.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it helped for him to show Dorian the influence that it had on others.
Right.
And to watch that play out, so that it almost gave him permission to find it as acceptable. Because later on, we'll find that Dorian, when he's in his full darkness, when he enters a room, people leave the room and people speak rumors about him. But at this point, he sees it as socially acceptable. Look at the praise and look at the love and adoration and attention that Lord Henry now gains himself. And
remember what he said. It's a terrible thing to be talked about, but even worse not to be talked about.
Right. And so he falls into this trap. Yeah. And I do see it too, that him reeling him in, it's like, first he must speak to Dorian, gets the hooks in, but it's not quite pulled him in. The picture being the bold statement. This is what has opened the mind of Dorian. And now this chance encounter, he gets to see, does the philosophy play out? Is there benefit to it? And here it seems convincing enough that there would be social reward for playing out what Lord Henry's saying. Of course, later on we find out that there is no reward. Here we see it as a bit of, we see the charm.
Right.
Anything on that one before going to 4?
Well, there were a couple of things inside of 3. Just again, like I said, there's no one who does one-liners better than Oscar Wilde. Okay, I always like to know everything about my new friends and nothing about my old ones. Of that,
goddamn.
Philanthropic people lose all sense of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It is their distinguishing characteristic. I believe that. Me and you kind of had a chat before we started this about, it wasn't even a chat. It was just a passing by. I mentioned something to the effect that don't become altruistic, it's the road to evil.
Yeah, I do believe this to some degree as well. I think that that the defining line is the level at which you play. Like as an individual, you probably shouldn't try to save the world. Maybe keep it localized, family, friends, and like your your neighborhood, let's say.
I don't think as an individual you should delay or completely give up your needs, wants, desires, and aspirations to help anyone. You have to come into the full flower of yourself. If you don't, say your goal, your ultimate goal, Derek, was to be a neurosurgeon, but you went and you paid your way, you got your prereqs and everything out of the way, but something came up, a friend or a family member needed money, and you had to stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You helped this friend or family up, but now your dream, your goal of being a neurosurgeon is completely gone. How many lives got affected by not having that expertise? Not just your own, but the people you could have saved.
Yeah.
I think that it's an evil thing to become a sacrificial lamb to save someone.
I think if it was put in such a dramatic manner, then the choice would be simple. But I don't think that it really pans out that way unless you're at a certain level of, like, for instance, if you're helping the needy, but you never
Sure you should help.
But no, I'm saying, but if you're like detached from what you're doing, so like you open the pamphlet and you say, well, I'm going to get my tax deductions. Which organizations, nonprofits am I going to submit to? Well, one is 90% of the nonprofits are cons. The other thing is you're not getting involved with, and you're not familiar with what you're doing. That's why I said if you're altruistic, like say locally, where I could be like, and I've done this before, this is something I do. So if like one of the things I like going out to do is passing out the information for the missing children. It's a different thing.
And it's because you're stop you from reaching a goal. Specifically concerned with people who will stop their life's progress and their goals to provide something for someone else. It doesn't help the world. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help the future. Now, me giving money to a homeless guy on the street, absolutely I should. It's not going to make or break me. But for me to give up my hopes, dreams, and aspirations for some guy on the streets, now that's a completely different.
Yeah, you want to go into it wise too, because you don't want to help the person so much that they're dependent.
Yeah.
You don't want to weaken them. You don't want to delay their success. In fact, the best thing to do would be to find a way to put them on the path. So let's say they become derailed. Maybe you could be a good teacher, or maybe you could be something. Maybe you intervened or you helped them, like I think of, for instance, Steve-O, right? Steve-O had a decent amount of people around him, separated himself from the bad influence. And those people had to, obviously, probably took a lot of time out of their lives and took a lot of risks to get him back on track. The reward being that now the Steve-O that we have is doing another thing. He seems to be accomplishing things. He seems to be kind of playing out. And then we get to see the exact shadow of his existence in Bam Margera, where Bam doesn't have that support group, let's say, and we're watching him derail further and crash and burn, and we're seeing the opposite side. And so, yes, I think, again, it's one of those things with Lord Henry where it's like you have a truth, but you're missing he withholds certain things.
That philanthropy, people who pride the people who they would help into mascots.
Yeah. Oh, that happens.
And once you
see that with politicians, Jeff Bezos and stuff.
And you'll tend to, one second. And it doesn't help them if you're not, if there are no more people to help. So it's in their vested interest to make sure that there's always that underclass. It actually plays to another thing that he said. The problem with slavery is we try to solve it by amusing the slaves. It'll never correct itself because of the ways that philanthropy goes about trying to solve it. And if they did solve it with all the money that they have, they couldn't give themselves those self-congratulatory pats on the back.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
have no real interest in solving it. They just give it enough to make themselves look good.
Yeah, got to look good and keep the project going. Don't want to solve the problem totally. It's like the thing with the poor. You know, California makes a lot of money off of their homeless.
Yeah, and that's a sad truth. That's pretty sad about it, Al. The other thing that we had here, and you brought up, was that it was. I just found it here. Behind every exquisite thing that existed, there was something tragic.
Mm-hmm.
The world had to be in travail, that the meanest flower might blow. Well, that plays into what you were talking about earlier about how you feel that some tragedy is beautiful. I don't want to admit that that's true. I think it's the reaction to the tragedy that's beautiful.
Yes, I agree.
The tragedy itself, and I don't want to be someone who complains about just the random vicissitudes of life because bad things happen. It doesn't make you special. It doesn't make you unique in any way from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But to acknowledge how people react in a positive way to the bad things and how they try to overcome them, that is special.
Right.
That is something that should be.
Yeah. And on that point, I'll clarify. I do think there are ugly things. And I do think that so I'm Christian, so I do believe we live in the world of history. We're in post-paradise. So it's quite ugly, children dying and terrible, nasty diseases and that sort of thing. But it is also the thing that awakens. Colorful, I like that he used the word colorful because colorful doesn't come with morality, necessarily. I see colorful as the full spectrum of variety. And I do think that sin brings variety to living, just like the arbitrary does as well and all other things. And you can definitely take that and try to become, kind of a hero or whatever.
But he was using his malevolently.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to, I don't think he wanted to destroy Dorian, but he wanted to control.
Yeah, I think he wanted to control him, and I don't think he knew exactly. This is why him referring to it as the experiment. He didn't know what the means was going to be, but he was curious enough to be like, well, let's find out.
Right.
How does this end? He has no clue.
Chapter 4, buddy.
Okay, here we go. Chapter 4. A month later, Dorian sits in Lord Henry's library. Lord Henry is late, as he usually means to be, stating that punctuality is the thief of time. Before Lord Henry arrives, we meet his wife, who is a jealous fury over Dorian. She tries to act as if she does not care, but dominates Dorian with questions to which she leaves little room for answers. She also openly contradicts herself. Lord Henry then enters, and we see the disdain they have for one another. After a bit of a passive-aggressive spat, she leaves. This reminded me of the relationship that we find in The Great Gatsby. I don't know if you remember the abusive husband and the wife, but which I think is a book we should cover at some point. There's actually a lot of similarities between these two stories. Then Lord Henry shows how shallow he is by telling Dorian to never marry a woman with straw-colored hair because, my phone thought I was trying to zoom in. Okay, let me find it again. Okay, with straw-colored hair, because that is the warning sign of a woman who is too sentimental. He tells him to never marry at all. Men marry because they are tired, women because they are curious, and both are left disappointed. It should be pointed out that Oscar Wilde had difficulty in his own relationship with his wife, and it ultimately ended in divorce.
Do you think that Sybil's last name was a harken back to the sin that Dorian was pulled into?
In what way? Explain.
It's not spelled the same way, but it's Vane.
Sybil Vane. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wow, yeah, I think maybe.
I was like, isn't that interesting?
Sybil Vane, vanity. Yeah.
His sin was vanity, basically, and he fell in love with a girl whose last name was Vane.
It's gotta be. There's no way he did that on accident. That's pretty awesome. Let's see. Dorian then talks about how he is in love with an actress as a direct result of Henry's influences. He rightfully predicts that he will probably never marry, but fails to account for the actual reasons to come. Her name is Sybil Vane. He says that she is a genius in her art. In fact, he seems to know nothing about her at all except for her art. Lord Henry says no woman can be a genius. I fucking laughed when I read that.
Yeah.
Lord Henry states that he is currently analyzing women and is sort of an expert. Thought that this is difficult to believe directly after the scene of misery with his wife. I do see that as one of the contradictions. How could you be a genius of women when you don't even know how to please one?
I see you conveniently skipped over that middle part.
I go for it, yeah.
Women are decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it, and they say it charmingly. Women represent the triumph of matter over mind, just as men represent the triumph of mind over matter.
Yeah. But he states here that there are two types of women, the plain and the colorful. The plain are useful for reputation and respectability, while the colorful are charming but later wear too much makeup to cover their old age, making them a public joke. Dorian then describes how he went out searching for experiences and found a dingy theater and entered and fell in love with the lead actress playing Juliet, from Romeo and Juliet, of course. He goes on to describe her Rosalind in As You Like It, her Imogen and Cymbeline, and her Ophelia in Hamlet, and her Desdemona in Othello. Dorian says that your voice and the voice of Sybil Vane are two things that I shall never forget. He says each say different things, and he does not know whose to follow. He describes Sybil as sacred. He defends this romance against Lord Henry's jokes. Dorian describes her as a shy child who knows nothing of life, who lives with her mother, a faded, tired woman who long ago used to be an actress herself. Dorian then invites Lord Henry to see a performance, and they decide to bring Basil as well. Dorian confesses a little guilt from the neglect that he has been giving to Basil, as he has not seen him for some time. Lord Henry is excited to see his influence maturing in Dorian. As Lord Henry left, he contemplates his experiment, as he calls it, another analysis, or an experiment in vanity, as his scientific method leads to through flawed philosophies that do not reflect in reality. Once he returns home, he finds a telegram to announce Dorian Gray's engagement to Sybil Vane. Chapter 4. I would say the chapter 2 is our inciting incident, and chapter 4 would be our first sort of turn.
First time where you see Dorian rebuff Harry and actually tell him that the things you say are horrid and it makes me afraid.
Yeah, and he's acting on them now too.
Yeah.
So he recognizes them, he's acting on them.
Yeah, it's almost as if he's trying to resist the sin. But later on you find, well, this excerpt, I felt this gray, monstrous London of ours with its myriad of peoples, its sordid sinners and its splendid sins, as you once phrased it, must have something in store for me. So he's terrified at the things that Lord Henry has told him. He's terrified at what he feels, but he can't help but indulge in it. And he hadn't, up until this point, indulged in any of it. And then he goes into this dirty, dusty theater. It's not a place where an aristocrat like him would be. And he finds something beautiful in it, and a reflection of himself, essentially. He's still, even though he's tasted of the fruit, so to speak, he still has an innocence about him, and he sees that innocence in her. It's almost his Eve character.
Yeah, it is. It is like his Eve character. Earlier, I had mentioned, too, that I thought that she had a relationship to the Animus, but an immature version. And I think that's because what he sees on stage is unfolding like dreams. Later on, there's going to be discussion because of how she commits suicide and stuff.
Well, he's 18 if I remember correctly.
Right. She's like 17 because
Because her brother's 16 and she's younger.
I thought the brother was younger.
No, he's 16, and I believe she's like 14 or 15.
Is that so? Because I thought that she referred to him as a young child who doesn't understand and that he'll grow up. But he's the young protective brother.
Oh, okay. I could be wrong. I thought that it was
Let me double check because it is
younger, and she was upset with him because didn't understand. She was calling him childish because he was saying, "You don't even know
right.
this guy."
Let's see. Yeah, the brother is younger than her, but by only 1 year.
She's 17.
She's 17 and he is 16.
All right.
But only so much. That's 1 year.
Yeah, but I noticed that in the book, that's when he starts to, Henry, but Dorian starts to rebuff Henry a little bit and starts to not so much appreciate his company.
In a psychological sense, by the way, if Dorian, let's say, if Dorian's animus was more mature, because there are 4 levels in the Jungian maturity of the feminine side of the masculine, and they take religious symbol. If she was the more mature level, even if she was level 3, not even level 4, let's say, there could have been a chance that she could have saved Dorian appropriately, but she was too immature to do any of this. Yeah. And this is something that is important when it comes to the integration of the shadow when somebody is developing themselves. The first steps in like the Jungian psychology is to cut the umbilical cord with the metaphysical mother, right? So that the metaphysical mother can remain a pure mother and not turn into the devouring mother.
Right.
And then as the journey psychologically goes on, there is a sort of death of the father that has to take place, a murder of the father, and then a rescue of the father. So that at least in male psychology, the male can then rise above. But see, he must integrate with his shadow through this process, which we see in narrative when somebody crosses that threshold, goes into the underworld, meets the shadow. Hopefully, if you think of like what happens in, like how does Dante ascend from hell? It's women figures, raising in maturity levels in stories. Women figures will often come into the hero's journey and save them. But in this case, Sybil is not at any level to deal with that and to ever pull Dorian from the hell that he's being pulled into. So it's unfortunate. But it's happens in many stories, and I think that's why it's appropriate that Romeo and Juliet is the first and the last thing he will see her perform. I do see her as a very Juliet kind of character.
Check this out. Let me see if this reminds you of the apple in the garden.
Sure, yeah.
It is only the sacred things that are worth touching, Dorian, Lord Henry, with a strange touch of pathos in his voice. But why should you be annoyed? I suppose she will belong to you someday. When one is in love, one always begins by deceiving oneself, and one always ends by deceiving others.
It's very much like the snake.
Yeah.
Go touch that fruit.
Yeah.
Let me watch my experiment.
Oscar was definitely in tune with the biblical stories.
Yeah.
And with Shakespearean lore. He definitely knew a lot of it.
Yeah.
The idea that she would the brother mentioned, who is this guy she's making love with? Shakespeare, right? And how she talked about their kiss and how it made him feel. And then how ultimately she dies. It's kind of reminiscent of Much Ado About Nothing, if you ever read the Shakespeare.
I have not.
I will live in thy heart. Let's see it. I will live in thine eyes, die in thy heart, and be buried in thy lap. But in this sense, dying meant sexually. The consummation.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh, live in thy eyes, die in thy heart, and be buried in thy lap. You know? Yeah, I kind of feel um, the same chemistry between those two before she dies. Yeah. And what happened is she died in his eyes. The poor performance, it killed any. Remember how he was selling her to Basil and to Henry.
Yeah.
She's the greatest. She brings civility to the unwashed masses.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell where she begins and her character ends.
Mm-hmm.
She's great, and then he takes his friends there, and she's an utter embarrassment. And in his eyes, he can't get over it. Supposed to live in the eyes, die in the heart, buried in the lap. She dies in his eyes, and he just walks away from her.
Yeah.
She ends up killing herself.
In a psychological sense, as far as the animus goes too, one of the things is the animus is where male pulls their ideal woman from. The ideal woman is not a conscious decision; it is an unconscious manifestation that comes from the psyche, and the image. Hopefully, it can healthily improve as you go through. This is also true for women. This is the opposite of this is also almost a mirrored effect, although the stages are different for the two. The 4 stages are different. The thing is, when he is in love with her, now you'll see this later on, and anyone who ends up watching this, and you as well, if you end up going and watching DMT trip videos explained and some of the experiences that people have, they oftentimes make love to a goddess. They are making love to their own animus, okay, or their own anima, whichever one is masculine, one
I think
feminine.
Animus is the male, the anima is the female.
I think you're correct. But so they'll often make love to the goddess. And the thing is that is an unhealthy relationship to have with the feminine side. And what ends up happening, oftentimes men will find themselves feeling disappointed in women very early on in their stages because she's not able to rise up to the level in which he has placed the ideal. Not until it becomes mature does he realize what the actual factors are that he wants to come into play for the female. What virtues are actually going to be virtuous to him, which would propel him forward. This is like that saying that strong women make powerful men, or this idea. The appropriate relationship, did you see which one it was?
Yeah, I think we're right. Can I pull it up here? 12 archetype definitions. Collective. Yeah, some persona. Shadow. Anima and animus. The anima is the feminine.
Anima, feminine?
Yeah.
Okay, anima, feminine. Okay, so
the animus is the male part of the feminine psyche.
When a man realizes the lack of virtues of an immature anima within himself, he will find that his love for whatever woman he is with, especially when they're younger, becomes destroyed. It is the cause of boredom in a relationship. It is the cause of looking at a woman and starting to realize maybe it was looks, because that's a really common one, where he's like, oh, I don't like the hair on her arms, or she has one toe that's too long, or these weird things that will end up manifesting, and then he will start to see it once he idolized.
It's all happening.
Was in his mind, and then the reality starts to fall into place.
So check this out. In Undiscovered Self, Carl Jung tells a story about a man who consistently dreamed about his disheveled, drunken wife in the middle of the streets causing a ruckus.
I think I remember this, yeah.
Virtuous, beautiful wife who would never do such a thing. But what the unconscious was telling him was that this is you.
Yeah.
This is what you do. And it showed his anima portraying the tendencies of him. How would you like it? It helped him to straighten up, you know? Yeah.
So in this case, I think what causes him to fall out of love with her is this. Remember what she says about her bad performance, and we'll get to it too, and I'll read the next thing.
She did exactly what Dorian did.
Well, I think that
it just dawned on me when I talked about that Carl Jung story. She saw her fall from this beautiful actress that she was to this thing that he couldn't recognize outside of the shell of her beauty.
Yeah, I do.
It is exactly what he did.
Do think that that is part of it, though I'm not sure if she was aware of the vanity.
No, she wasn't, but he was.
But the one thing, though, is that what she brings is she says, well, look, I couldn't profess my love to Romeo because I love you. You are the real love. Once the reality hits him of who she really is, that there's this possibility that's beyond the dreamscape in which she can put her audience into, this fake world. Once that is realized, then he sees her as this real person, this sniveling, crying, leaking-faced thing, which I think disgusts him. And to your point, he saw in her, he claimed something like, I was going to make you famous of some, what does he say exactly? I was going to make you a star of essentially is what he's saying.
Right.
Treating her into a similar fashion of, like, let's say Basil.
I was going to say, that exactly mirrors when Basil revealed the painting, crashed down, and he started crying. And when Basil realized that this was not the same Dorian anymore, just his talk with Henry changed his expression to a point where it made the picture beyond perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And Dorian was never the same. He didn't give her the same grace that Basil gave him.
Yeah.
You know, and she killed herself over it.
Yeah. Yeah, he could have, it was like him walking away and destroying it was him actually successfully putting the knife into the painting. If you cut this, it will destroy me.
He
Yeah.
killed her.
And he thinks that too later on. He thinks that I am the murderer.
Yeah.
Ooh. It's wonderful. This is good. Should I do the next one? Or do you got more?
Man. Oh, we can do it. I didn't think that it was gonna be this long, but I think it's great because we can actually complete this next week, and then we can come up with another book.
Okay.
Yeah. If you guys, and I don't know how many people watch.
Do you want me to hold it on this one? On this one, to do this next one next?
Yeah, we'll do this one.
Okay.
Every one after this, we'll push on. But if anybody in the chat or in the comments has a suggestion of a book you would like us to read and review and break down based on our observation of it, go ahead and put that down so we can check and see. We may already have the book. We're both avid readers.
Yeah.
So, and if we don't have it, we'll just go out and get it. It is our pleasure to do this. And again, we are both just laymen at this. We want to give it an everyman opinion, you know.
Yeah. Although I do think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
I want to be humble, but I also want to say, we're all right. We're all right. I might not have read everything that maybe a master's degree has gone through, but we're okay.
No, you know what? I've met people with master's degrees. As a matter of fact, I have a stepbrother who's a doctor, and he'll tell you that I read far more than he does.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're going into.
Yeah.
So, like, I will say I don't have
an English professor or a philosophy majors.
Right.
Or philosophy master's, probably depth of reading, but I definitely read a lot, and I may not have a complete understanding of it, but I will come to that on my own terms.
I think what we're doing too is we're sharpening our knives against each other here. So this is the last one then. This is a short one, and in fact, this gives me a chance to go back to the later chapters and flush them out more. So chapter 5, our last one of tonight, right? I'm on chapter 5? Okay. We meet Sybil and her mother. Here the mother, this I thought was really interesting, but here the mother expresses concern for Sybil's romance, calling attention to the fact that she doesn't even know the man's name, as the daughter calls him only Prince Charming. We learn that Sybil has a brother, James Vane, who is to leave for Australia soon. Brother, too, expresses concern for the romance, but when he does, suddenly the mother shifts to defend the romance, even though James uses the exact arguments that the mother had just made earlier to Sybil. We see that James, though younger than his sister, is very protective and loves her very much. But as he buds into his manhood, at a time when he could actually defend his sister's honor, he has to leave, missing his opportunity to raise his shield for her. The mother describes James as a bit of describes him as being a bit theatric, as well as her daughter, cementing the tie between the three. and their primary flaw. It is James's desire to be a hero on an adventure, and that's what drives him to leave. It is Sybil's life experience and tragedies only that causes, meaning that she's only played tragedies out on stage, that causes her to act out the very steps that lead to her tragedy, meaning that she learned those patterns and internalized them, I think. And the mother's unmarried relationship that she had with a scoundrel who was married, I believe that's what's suggested, to a man highly connected that the mother claims that she loves, is a sort of theatrical story as well. And she, of course, used to be an actress. James felt that his father was much like this Prince Charming. Then Sybil and James go for a walk, and he voices his concern. He warns her against the romance. Then she catches a glimpse of Dorian riding in a carriage with 2 other women. But it is too late for James to ever get a view of the man, a phantom that will haunt him, without even a name. James declares that if this phantom romance hurts his sister, that he will kill Prince Charming. This makes a scene, and the sister urges them to leave. That's a pretty small synopsis compared to what I had.
You got about 10 pages in that chapter. This chapter was just honestly, it was a broad brushing of the frailty of women. One of the quotes that I outlined in this was, "Women defend themselves by attacking, just as they attack by sudden and strange surrenders." That actually is a foreshadowing right there. They attack by sudden and strange surrenders. But this was just it was showing the family of Sybil, her background, how she came up, and who was important to her.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the sight of Dorian in the Broham with the 2 females was also a foreshadowing. He was never going to be hers. And the brother, I think he kind of knew innately that he was going to break his sister's heart or damage her in some way. I don't think that his protestations were unfounded at all. I think they were grounded in what any brother would say. You know, the sister was innocent completely. And it's not very different. I mean, it's a different caliber, but it's pretty much the same as when Basil warned Harry against Dorian. Basil understood the innocence. Harry wanted to destroy the innocence, and he warned him to stay away. In this case, it was the brother who told the mom, keep her away, and then told her, stay away. And I don't believe in this. I don't think this should happen. Because she, in this chapter, pretty much Dorian becomes Basil, and she becomes Dorian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Dorian, not as, not as beneficent, is that the word I'm looking for? No. Benevolent. Not as benevolent as Basil. And she ends up dying anyway. But Dorian does say something. No, not Dorian, but was it Dorian? No, she does say something that struck me. She said, "To fall in love is to surpass oneself." And I was gonna write down notes here in the side of the book, but I could not focus on any one thought. There were so many coming to me about that, what she meant, how so, and to what effect that statement that she made, to what effect it was in her particular circumstance. But then when she does the play and she bombs horribly because she couldn't profess love to a fake Romeo, was that her surpassing herself because she was in love? Or was that a regression? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there's a bit of a tease in this portion of the story because, in many ways, so for her to say something like that, for example, it's like if it was true love, if it was matured, if she was mature enough to know, and there's many steps she could have gone through, like not accepting him, letting the relationship build, all the normal healthy things that could have happened, that could have saved Dorian and saved herself from her own tragic uh, end, then yes, the relationship could have caused a surpassing, given her burdens that could have been carried like virtues and things like that. We see that in life. Like the life that Dorian goes on to live ends up tragic and sort of meaningless, but a life with good love could lead to many things that could have surpassed her. So I think in a sense, she had a hint of the pattern. She had played those patterns out, both the tragedies and the comedies. And so I think she knew these things. And I think that what Oscar Wilde is kind of doing is sort of teasing us. He's teasing us because if you look at how the mother, and what I had said about the three of them being tied through theatrics, even though the brother is not an actor, the mother kind of pokes fun at him, and so does the sister. And they kind of are like, oh, you're trying to play this little hero role. I think Oscar Wilde is playing around with us as the readers too, to give us a sense that there could have been a hero in the story, and he plays with it later. Doesn't end up panning out. The brother coming for his revenge. He misses his opportunities for many reasons, which we'll get into, by thinking he has the wrong man, and ends up getting killed in this sort of like weird hunting accident. But he could have been our knight in shining armor. Oscar Wilde is sort of poking us and saying, this is not the story you're reading. He's not going to put on the knight's clothing. Oscar Wilde plays with us later on, too, with the idea of what if Dorian Gray was a hero in the story as well, because Basil at first tries to paint him, sketch him out, and draw him in armor as the reference to classical paintings. I'll paint Dorian, but I'll put him in the old-fashioned clothing. You see this in portraits of people, like let's say Revolutionary era, but yet they have them dressed up as if they're Romans or as if they're knights in the medieval times. It's a romantic style of painting, and this is something Basil tried to do. And I think it's Oscar playing with us and saying there is not even the name Prince Charming. Prince Charming is not coming. He's not going to save her. And I think that he's teasing us to really highlight the tragedy so that when it comes time for the brother to die and it comes time for Dorian to fall, we really feel that sort of like Macbeth weight of we're like, there was never a chance.
No.
Almost at this point anyway, there's no chance at this point. I do feel like this chapter is a bit of a tease because it deals with Oscar Wilde's love of theater, his love of fiction, realization of its, there's a certain aesthetic truth to it, but there's also a bit of a lie underpinning it.
There's of an aesthetic thing, the Prince Charming. I didn't think about it the way that you brought it up, in that is a guy, Prince Charming, who sees who knows of a princess in distress. There's a dragon, a lava moat, dangerous perils all the way.
Yeah.
He goes and saves. This is not Dorian's character at all.
No, right.
But it does kind of set up the idea of what if there was say you wrote a what if Dorian Gray.
Yeah.
It could be a parallel universe where he actually does do these things. He develops into a character that can save.
Yeah.
And honestly, it foreshadows even more, because the mother was like, well, if this is about money, then do it. And even brings up he could buy us away from this guy who we owe money to, who's been good to us,
he could actually save them.
He could actually save them, but I don't even think he had any concept that they were in trouble.
I don't think he knew anything. Hardly. When he later talks about him, he's like, he's some sailor or something. And it's all vague.
Yeah. And again, that's that innocence, or the, what do you call it? Not ineptitude, but what it's.
Well, I think this is what the two of them knew of each other, is this. She thought she had found Prince Charming, playing out the only patterns that she understood. Again, I think Dorian was not completely incorrect that she was not experienced. All of her experiences were up on stage. She had done these plays again and again and again and again. So it's like yeah, she's definitely naive, but she also recognizes the patterns. This is important because if you take somebody with my philosophy is that these patterns could save you. And yet here's somebody who's played these patterns out, but doesn't know the reality of the patterns. And so here comes Prince Charming. She doesn't understand. And what they are to each other is both the same thing. To Dorian, to her, to him, it is both just the shadows and mirrors and the trickery of theater playing on each other. They don't see the reality of one another. I mean, he only hooks up with her really quickly backstage, and it's all so quick, and, you know, they really don't know anything about each other, and it's like she sees him as real-life Romeo, and he sees her as the potential of all feminine characters, is how he sees her, as she could be all the comedic, the tragic, all of them, all at once. That's why I think that it's his immature animus. It's too much femininity, too broad, not specific, and once reality becomes specific and it's like, hey, Dorian, I truly love you. My performance sucked. And so now you're stuck with only one option. She's no longer Juliet. She's no longer this. She is just Sybil Vane. Just all potential gone. For him, anyway. That's how he sees it, unfortunately. But anyway, I think this chapter is a bit of a tease. And also, I think maybe to reiterate from Oscar Wilde's point of view, how important the aesthetic is to the story, like how important the element is. Just another reminder, we're always talking about flowers. We're always talking about going to the theater. I mean, after Sybil kills herself, we'll get into it later, but he goes out to go to the opera. There's this constant beating us as like, well, here's a family that is all, she was an actress and she had a tragic life and has 2 illegitimate children to an almost Dorian Gray type character, maybe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that struck me.
sins of the father and all that.
Yeah. Dorian's mother, being a Dorian Gray figure, hailed for her beauty.
Right. And lost it.
Yeah.
The one thing I haven't been able to quite figure out, though, is that weird thing where she's sort of like hard on her daughter, but then when the son comes along, she's a little bit more defensive. It's an odd thing, but it strikes me as so true that it's almost like I've seen this play in reality. This idea of like, well, I can criticize her because I'm the mother.
Yeah.
But then the son comes and she's like, well, I can take care of it. She'll be safe with me. But it's an interesting thing that I can't quite articulate, but I enjoyed.
I think I have my hands on that one because I have sisters and brothers, and I do not the sisters who I was not raised with. I'm talking about the sister that lived with me, my brother, and my mother. My mom was very hard on her, but when it came to me, the oldest brother being hard on her, it wasn't tolerated. I think that's just a mother-daughter relationship trait. Then the mother doesn't want. I mean, even with my kids, my wife, I can be hard on my boy, but she will step in with him because that's her boy and he is mama's boy, to a certain extent. But when it comes to the girls, she steps in a lot sooner, a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm sure you're gonna see that too with your daughter and your wife and your son. She will protect the boy from you, no doubt.
I've already seen it.
Don't tolerate. She will allow you to discipline him and give him what he needs from a man's point of view. But the girl, it won't be the same.
Yeah, I've already seen the dynamics taking place especially as my daughter is getting older. I just had a thought on the idea that maybe it's also based on the mother's experience. So this realistic act that you're expressing happens in real people, but in this specific case as well, maybe because the mother had this relationship with this married man, or this other man that was not free as they described it, which I think is just saying that he was married, right?
Yeah.
So she sees it maybe 2 ways. One, she tells her daughter to be weary of the whole thing and not get carried away because she went through this, and a man of a higher cut can be dangerous, can lead to heartbreak. I'm sure she was heartbroken because she tells her son that they were truly in love.
Mm-hmm.
And was that the man who was truly in love, or whichever way that plays out, at least we know the mother claims that she was in love. Right. So she might be warning the daughter. Then the dynamic of what you're describing, of how the mother and the daughter's relationship works, but then also playing out in this fashion where she's a little bit more defensive because maybe she's holding out some hope that it's like, well, as far as we know, he's a single gentleman. What if my daughter could actually obtain that which I never was able to obtain? Going back into the potential of the teasing, I would say, of there being a hero, whether it be the brother who could come and avenge the sister, which of course that's not foreseen here, or Dorian coming in and, swooping in and pulling him out of poverty, which is a story we've seen played out.
What the mother can't attain. That's been a theme in movies a few times throughout my life. But, and contrast that, I rarely see a movie where a man, or read in a book where a man wants his son to not do as well. He wants his son to exceed him. It's almost an obsession to see your son exceed you. But you're right, when it comes to women, females in general, a mom will do everything, even trying to keep up with beauty standards to stay in competition with the daughters.
Yeah. I think that Lord Henry mentions that, right? In the earlier chapters, we had said that he says something about these women competing with their daughters,
right,
when it came to putting on their paint.
Yep. And I see that in certain books that I've read, in certain movies that I've watched, even in sitcoms from back in the day in the 80s when we were younger. The mothers will always be in some sort of competition with the daughters, whether it be in the house or in the world outside of the house. But the father, he will not be in a competition with the son in any meaningful way unless it's to antagonize him to do better than the father. For instance, you can see in a cartoon as simple as American Dad, where Stan, the father, is a wrestling star, and he puts his trophies up all over his office, not as a, Steve, look what I've done, but Steve, can you do better? And he puts his son on a wrestling team. Or with Bill Cosby in his show, he was a track star, and he gets Theo to get into different sports and stuff like that, and he wants to see him excel. Or you pick your sitcom, you'll always see this theme around father and son relationships, where the father is pushing the son, hey, you have to do better than me. You got to take that next step. You can't be equal to me, and there's no being lower than me. You gotta exceed me. And I feel that way with my son. I tell him all the time, being as good as me is as good as being a failure. You have to move past me. And he has, in so many ways he has. And it makes me proud. Doesn't make me jealous. That's my boy. I think most dads feel that way. I think when your son gets old enough, and I know you have a little guy, you're going to feel the same way. You probably put him in sports far earlier of an age than you did.
Right.
You'll probably have him reading books that at an age earlier than you read those books.
That's actually a huge part of why I read to them every single night, because I know that I will not read as much as I should have read, because I did not start seriously reading until I was in high school. And that did not get serious enough until I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And my parents did not carry many books in my household. And my house is now packed with them. And I read my children, for instance, I read this to them.
Yeah.
I read them all levels and all things. Yeah. And I try to have them exposed to as many words as possible.
Yeah, no, that's good, man.
Because I'm hoping that, like, when I see them when they're older, like, boy, I hope you have a better head start.
My grandmother's father was who started me on my reading journey, George Grimmett. He, I think I was 6 years old was the first memory that I have, but every year he sent us all the entirety of the Cat in the Hat collection. Yeah. Or not Cat in the Hat, the Dr. Seuss collection.
Yeah,
You had about 20 books at that time, maybe 25 to 30 of them. And we got a fresh set every year.
Mm-hmm.
That started just a domino effect to where I spent more time in the fourth grade in the library than I did at recess. And back then we had 3 recesses back in Collinsville. And it was strictly because I needed to read Choose Your Own Adventure books. I had to know how Nancy Drew did this. I had to know how the Hardy Boys did that. The other thing was that when we moved from where we were to East St. Louis, being inside the library or being inside of a book was life-saving because I didn't have to be outside amongst the terrible streets of East St. Louis. And it wasn't until we left there that I was comfortable to be outside again, which, I moved in with my grandparents, my dad's mother, my grandmother, paternal grandmother, and she was very big on reading. I mean, she insisted upon it constantly, and she herself did it. And she had to get through a book a day.
Yeah.
And not only that, she took classes right up the street at SIUE until God knows when. It seemed like she took a class in anything, basket weaving, it didn't matter. And some of them I had the displeasure or pleasure, however you see it, of going with her. I remember to one of her English classes, she wanted me to come and take notes with her, and she did it to prove a point. At the end of that hour and a half class, I had a page and a half of notes, and I mean, front and half of the back. She had 5 or 6 pages of notes, and she was trying to teach me how to be a better listener, a better note taker. But yeah, I know we're kind of digressing, but it goes back to the same thing. Parents want you to do better than what they do. And my parent in this case was my grandparent, and we are both parents. And I don't find there to be jealousy between men and their children, but I do find there to be jealousy between women and their children.
I would even say that if you did see it, not that it's because it's not impossible, right? If you saw a man who was, try to imagine right now, a man who is jealous of his children. And in my mind, and I would imagine the same for you, I automatically think of something that is somewhat feminine.
Yes.
Like I picture in my head like a really douchey, like dad who's like probably wearing shorts that are too short and trying to act like he's some kind of athlete, but probably lost it a long time ago.
If he ever had it.
Trying to be competitive, but being like weak-wristed. Like that's the archetypal thing. So that's what my subconscious tosses up and says, who's the jealous father?
Right.
It's kind of pathetic,
Yeah, who now? Everything that he's learning, everything that he's doing, all it does is make my heart proud. And he's doing things that I'll never be at the North Pole. But thank God that in a way, he told me one day, he said, Dad, in a way, you've been everywhere I've been. I said, how's that, son? He said, because I've taken so much of what you said, so many of your quotes, and I've passed them to people without thinking about it. I've heard myself. I heard your words coming out of my mouth when I speak to people. And they're like, where did you get this from? And they're like, oh, my dad. And he was like, so you're here with me all the time. And that was even a bigger point of pride. It's like, hey, go more places. One of his examples was he was in I think he was in Maryland or he was in Germany. I can't remember, but he was wrestling some people. And they were asking him if he thought he was really good at this. Now, my son was an excellent wrestler through high school. He could have taken state, but COVID took that away from him. But he's a very small guy. He's about 5'10", 140 pounds, 5'9", 140 pounds. He's a very small guy, very unassuming, and went further in sports than I could ever hoped. But they were asking him, do you believe that that you can beat us, that you can hang with us? And they said something to the effect, because we don't believe you can beat us. And he used one saying that I get from my mother's mom that I use all the time: believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. He said I use it, and it kind of silenced him. And then I went out on the mat and I beat them all, Dad.
Nice.
And I was like, great.
A quick theory came to mind. But what would the reason of this dynamic be? And I'll try to make it quick. It might ring as obvious to some people, or it might come off as complete bullshit. I'm not sure. It's just a thought. Like why this dynamic is the most common, and maybe it's because of this. So men seem to be set up to want to be in competition with each other because that allows us to excel. And it would seem healthy as the boy, to set yourself up in competition of your with your father. So that would help you excel. But when it comes to the internal family group, your tribe, let's say, but your family, but I would extend this out too, because it doesn't do you too much benefit to be competitive as the dominant force. If you're the father, you're at a higher point, obviously, as the child has to progress. Like when they're little tiny things, you don't want to hurt them, wrestle them too hard, push them too hard. You want to push them enough so they can get used to resilience. But when their bodies are weaker and as they get older and their bodies become stronger, you still know that their mind is fragile. You know, a teenage boy is going to cry much more often typically than a 30-year-old man. Right? And that's okay. So, but you want to give them that resistance, but you're not trying to crush them. You're not in competition with them. You're training them.
Right.
You're like a good coach.
No.
A good coach should never want to beat his fighter or something like that.
Coaches kids. I'd say that from experience. I coach my son in everything. And when he quit baseball was when
Oh, you mean like directly coach like that?
When he quit playing baseball was when I realized that I was being too hard on him. That was a sport that he really shined in. He had a big bat at a young age. He had great eyes and great hands. And I was very hard on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave that sport up as soon as he could. And that's when I realized that, you know, I'm not going to coach him in football. He was a back and a receiver, so I intentionally coached the lineman or the defensive line or the offensive line. And when it came to wrestling, I just pulled back from that 100% because I didn't want to lose him in those sports because he had ability. And I didn't want him to just be jaded because my dad is putting so much pressure.
Right. That's why I was saying you want to put enough for them to be able to resist, but not so much that you crush them.
Yeah.
Just like when you're wrestling, I find this, I'm wrestling with my son. He's a little tiny toddler still, right? Just at 4 years old. And I'll give him enough pressure that he can push back a little bit.
Right.
Or, you know what I mean? And in that sense, I'm coaching him. I'm teaching him how much to resist, how much to push. But I'm also myself learning in that experience, which should come into play later. So enough coaching, let's say, would be just something like, for instance, that I would see as healthy as me and Sovereign have talked about. This is something I'm going to stick to. If my child starts a project, he's going to finish at least the first cycle of that project.
Yeah.
So if it's a year or something, that will be, let's say, my coaching effect. If he begins baseball in a year, well, you might not like it. I'm going to have you finish it. Yeah. This is something that I was primarily raised by my mother, and my mother was worried about me being primarily raised by my mother. Now, my father was in my life, of course, but, you know, weekends, and then that went further out. One of the first sports she had put me in was soccer. I hate soccer. I hate it to this day. However, she did not let me quit. She said, we'll finish the year and then we'll switch. We'll try something else out.
That's a rule they have.
And season. I love that she did that. And to me, that was her, let's say, coaching. But of course, she let my coaches be my coaches as far as the one who's going to be, they're the more stranger person. So they can be a little bit more direct with you in some ways. You know, that parent still has to be, I think, create enough resistance that they can overcome. You don't want to just give them everything and turn them into a spoiled child. Even that's where the word of like spoiling coming from. And then, but you never want to be in competition against them. You should allow them to be a competition against you from that, from the idea of like you were saying, you walk in and let's say maybe the father has a bunch of trophies. You would hope that makes the child go, son of a bitch, I want more trophies.
Yeah.
Or I want to, you know, outshine. And hopefully that will breed into other behaviors outside of the safety and protection of the youthful games. Because once they enter the real world, it's like, can I have a long marriage? You know, can I be a good father? Can I excel in these places where maybe somebody doesn't come around and actually give you a physical trophy, but there is the golden reward of life, let's say, you know, nicer house or whatever it might be.
He said, my respect from you comes from the fact that from all the dads that he's seen, whether they're in their kids' lives or away from their kids. He was like, you're the only one that I see that tries to do everything right. And he was like, it's annoying because it's hard to do everything right. He was like, I don't know how you do it. And I was like, son, I don't do everything right. I just try. He was like, it just seems like you always know what to do and when to do it. And I said, I'm winging this just like everybody else, man.
Yeah.
But it was a cool thing to be recognized by him, in that way. Especially this kid who I ran away from the greatest sport I ever saw him play. Let me tell you the way that I did this. My son was he was a very talented shortstop at a very young age. One day, he freelanced a grounder to him. Now, what I mean by that is he thought he could just fancy scoop it up and toss it and get the out. Well, his little fancy scoop sent the ball up his glove and right into his teeth. Yeah. Got his lips top and bottom, loosened some teeth up, and he was bleeding all over the place, So we pull him out for a play or two. We give him some Tylenol, put some ice on his lip, wash it off, get back in the game.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't want to. And I was like, son, you got no choice, man. You can't go. You got to get back in the game. And I said, now you know to cover your glove, don't you? And he went out there and he fielded a couple more. You could see it was timid, but he covered his glove. He got a couple more outs and stuff like that. I thought it would have boosted his self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, my wife could tell he hated the game. He wanted nothing to do with it. In the World Series, not the World Series, the playoffs back then, he ended up ending his Little League career with a 2 or 3-1 walk-off homer into left field. Never played the game again.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all because of the pressure that we put on him, that I put on him, you know what I mean?
Well, in part. I wouldn't take full ownership. But in part, I would say yes. For anyone listening, and even for myself, as my children will grow older, it's a fair warning of, when to let up. And of course, we're going to make these mistakes, and we're going to, again, it's like when I'm playing with my son and we're playing, I've had points where, I've gone a little too hard with him, or, I over wrestled him, and, and learning that play. It's not going to be perfect, but, there's also, and I'm saying this from remembering being a child, I didn't like my soccer game, and that is a choice that I ultimately did make even as a child. And so partially, yeah, maybe it was the pressure as well, but it is still a decision that your son, had made. And the reason I just put that out there is because it doesn't have to ultimately be some kind of, because if it's not the game he wanted to play, ultimately, then the time that he quit was probably the time he should have quit. And there's other things he was going to go and do. And then there was things that you were going to learn from, maybe in the next thing, the next
mistakes back then, but I've perfected them at this point.
Right. And how else would you have done so without making them, right? So that's my point, is maybe the next game he plays, the next thing he gets involved with, now I, be a little bit lighter on him, that sort of thing.
Yeah, he's playing at a level high above me now. He's a combat camera in the Marines, so.
You see?
Yeah.
And is he enjoying it?
Oh, he loves his job, man. I think he loves the Marines more than he loves his job, though.
That must be the way that it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Every job in the Marine Corps is lesser than the Marine Corps itself. That is like the overall thing.
And his desire to stay in the Marines is, at this point, and I hope none of his girlfriends ever see this, is based on who he's dating. He's a lifer if she's in. He's not if she's not.
I would say take it a term at a time. If he feels good enough juice in him for the second term, take the second term.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the second term, because what it is it's a matter of, have you had enough? Because I love the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
but the Marine Corps is a bitch.
Yeah, that's basically what he said.
It is. There's no doubt about it. That when you're in, you're like, what in the fuck, man? There is so much stupid. There is so much, just a lot of things. There's a lot. There's a constant pressure. But then there are these moments of glory, and then especially when you get out. And I'll tell you, one term for me was enough. That's exactly what I needed to get that taste, get on with life, and then be able to, go at things and say, this ain't nothing.
You know what?
But
that statement right there, I think I know what book we should do next.
sure. What is it?
It's the book that my son carries with him wherever he goes. It's one that I made him read over and over again from the time he was
The Alchemist?
The Alchemist.
Okay, cool. I don't have a copy of it.
I think I need to. So
if you do, awesome. If not, I'll keep my eye out. It's a very popular book, so I should come across it at some point.
yeah, it's like $4 at Barnes and Nobles. You probably find it in a thrift shop for $1 or $2.
Well, I feel like I've been getting really lucky at the thrifts. I mean, I found this right when we needed it.
Right.
So
I think that should be the next one. I think
perfect.
That's a great book, especially based on our conversation about our sons. It's a great book. I've had him read that 3 times a year since he was 8, and he carries it with him in his barracks. I bought it for his friends on his wrestling and baseball teams. And that's not the only book I've ever had him read, but that's the one that I keep drilling into his head because of the message behind it. And I think being a person who loves a narrative and the crossover with spirituality and religion, you're going to find this book. You're going to love it. I can't wait to see your reviews and how you react to it. I honestly can't.
Cool.
I think you're going to love the book. And I won't give away any of the story at all, but I'll be happy to read it again.
Perfect.
Very quick read. It's a little quicker than this one is.
No shit. Okay.
Yeah, I would say it's about there, and yeah, I think it'd be a great book to break down. So we will finish Dorian Gray next week,
Mm-hmm.
and not only will we finish Dorian Gray, you want to start The Alchemist or you want to wait?
Well, we'll see. Let's see how far we dig into it, because this is a pretty lengthy episode itself. We did 5 chapters. It might be lengthy again on the next half. I wouldn't even be surprised if it turned into 3 as potential. Maybe. I'll leave that open. I don't want to be too strict on ourselves. But we will start again on, chapter 6. At least we know that. We may finish.
All right.
And then we'll hop into The Alchemist when it comes, whether episode 3 or on episode 2.
That sounds...
I will say, too, that I think that this structure seemed to work.
All right.
I dig it. I don't know how you feel about it.
I dig it. Well, I need to come up with some synopsis myself. I can't have you doing all the work. You know what I mean? It's not fair to you.
Well, I will tell you, I thoroughly enjoy it. So the thing, it came naturally to me because I do it anyway.
All right.
And so because this, the audience doesn't know, but they can maybe find it. I did a breakdown on Exodus. And this is something I've always loved doing. Something I like to do. I like to read a story and then be like, what is that? What is the thing? What is the, not just the moral lesson, but what is the symbol? What are the symbols? Because the way I see it, it's like what is the psychological archetypes that are playing the actors in the theater?
I think that brings up other books that I would want us to do, like the Bhagavad Gita, the different avatars, the archetypes, the actors in that story. I think you would have a ball breaking that down.
That'd be fun. And so I do it naturally. So yes, if you tell me that you're doing a synopsis, then go ahead and do it too. And then I'll probably still write my notes on it.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do like this idea of telling the audience the story as we go. So that if you haven't read it, they know pretty much the story up until chapter 5 right now.
Yeah, they're getting free Cliff Notes.
And, go ahead. We might appeal to the college students. They'll write their paper and be like, well, they can bring up animus, they can bring up all this history that you put in and this Jungian psychology and write a hell of a paper off of for a couple guys who don't have any degrees.
Well, I'll tell you what, after we do The Alchemist and possibly, because I want to do a religious text with you, that's why I was thinking the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita or some of the Vedas.
Yeah.
I would definitely like to get into something more historical and fact-based, like the Wages of Destruction,
Mm-hmm.
or
Oh, I know I want to do like Revolutionary War stuff at some point.
great, some of the lesser-known aspects of World War I and World War II, like um, uh, say the Harlem Rattlers would be a great one. The Triple Nickels or the Ballast Ballooners. Um, these lesser known units, or the real Inglorious Bastards, the real bastards. That would be a great one.
Do you want to know? This is a random piece of trivia, but my platoon's nickname that was given by the other platoons in boot camp was the Notorious Bastards.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Were you guys the ones depicted in World War II?
No.
No.
No. They just called us the Notorious Bastards because of the Inglorious Bastards, a kind of a play on it, and they initially had done it as sort of a play on that title because we were annoying the shit out of the other platoons, because it's a competition
Yeah.
of stats and trophies. There's trophies that you get running,
Yeah.
your PT scores, your CFT scores, your drill, and we were not allowing any platoon to become. There was any platoon would win a trophy, but we were always the one that would knock out everyone else, so they couldn't have enough trophies to be consistent winners.
Oh, okay.
And so they were getting pretty frustrated with us
Yeah.
because we were always either like a second placer or a first placer, but we were always knocking somebody down. And then we ended up pulling it all together in the end, taking the points home, and we did it through our final drill. We won that, and that's what won us enough on the averages to be the top platoon. But we were the Notorious Bastards. So anyway, it's a tattoo I plan on getting at some point.
No,
Don't get, for your son too, I don't know if he's done it yet, but don't get moto tattoos until either you're like at least past first term, or out. So at least be like career, on the verge of career or being second term, like at least be a sergeant. Don't be a lance corporal running around with a supermoto tattoo.
yeah, I think that's what he is actually. A last corporal, yeah.
Does he have his moto tat?
No, he doesn't have a tat. He just got his blood stripe last year.
Oh, cool. So he's good. Corporal. He's a corporal. And so there's some acceptance there. Although a risky move it can be, there's some acceptance. Now, though, I do believe it would be socially acceptable to get a moto tat if he's a corporal and then got busted on a rank.
He has been in JP once.
And JP is getting there. So if he ever loses rank, then definitely he can get it, because then you enter the leagues of like Barcelona and all these other guys. There's a weird, the Marine Corps people in the top would never admit it, but there is a respect for a little bit of anarchy in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, no, there's actually a Marine here I've never met, but I've seen his vehicle driving, and it says NJP ×3.
Perfect. Yeah, they say you're not a real Marine until you get NJP.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things you have to keep going through, and it's like, when am I ever actually a Marine? It turns out the Eagle Globe and Anchor, that ain't it. Oh, I have to get NJP'd. Oh, I have to go fucking get deployed. You have to, yeah. Anyway, guys, it's been an awesome episode.
It has been great. Come back to the series. In the beginning was a thought. We'll break down the rest of the story of Dorian Gray, and hopefully we can amuse you and with some of the facts in our commentary on the story. And it's been great. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to In the Beginning Was the Thought. Tune in next Friday to catch the raw, unedited live broadcast.